Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
It was the first days of June 2002. There was a strong heat in the city. So many children seemed to be a yard on their own age yet unknown. Everywhere were running, jumping, and shouting, and with precise voices of kids of all different ages, somewhere in the garage, and stood guys, teenagers, discussing the failed Los Angeles Lakers game. What had been shown on First the day before. On the playground, there were loudly frolicking kids about 7 years old. Behind them walked an older girl with a businesslike look, constantly interfering in their children's games, so that they do not hurt each other. On the benches sat a company of guys by the look of middle school students, playing family, throwing to each other a red rubber ball. A homeless man shouted. One of the guys sharply threw the ball to his friend. There was general laughter. The children were so loud that the grandmothers of the neighboring benches, all this cacophony began to annoy. "Get out of here, you fools." Aunt Wendy got up from the bench and approached the boys. "What can't you see? There are small children playing here." The boys didn't calm down. They laughed at Tony, who had managed to marry an alcoholic and become homeless. Of course, it was all just play-by-play, but still so funny that the boys laughed at the firewood and their bellies, ignoring the indignant look on Aunt Wendy's face. "Come on, Aunt Wendy. We're out of here," said Thomas, the rowdiest boy in the yard. "Let's go." "But what kind of words are you talking about? I'm going to talk to my mom, so I'm going to talk loud again," Thomas shouted after her. They're already leaving with their friends towards the garages. The noisy company left the yard. They were once again chased away for swear words and loud shouting by Wendy, the storm of the yard and the head of the house. "What are we going to do?" "Guys," Thomas asked the boys. "Let's go to the stone field," said Will. "Well, we'll decide on the way," answered Thomas. The boys went and hung around the neighborhood in search of entertainment, which of course they arranged for themselves. But whatever they did on those hot summer days, they were the happiest kids in the world. After all, it was vacation, which meant it was freedom. The summer sky was slowly changing, just as it was getting darker and darker. And yet, even at 8 o'clock plus in the evening, it was still quite bright. Not even 200 hours ago. The courtyard was full of children, hence the noise, the shouting, and the life. Now there were only 2 women, one of whom was Wendy, and 2 girls about 8 years old. They often stayed out late. The girls could sometimes go home at 11 o'clock p.m. And their names were Kate and Daria. They became friends, as if, somewhere in their subconscious, they felt they had a similar misfortune, a misfortune. That was dysfunction. The girls grew up in families with parents, alcoholics, who almost did not work, and without bread to water at the expense of handouts from the state, and money on loan from relatives and buddies of drinking buddies. And if Kate and parents were quiet and phlegmatic, and drunkards, then Dad and Mom Daria knew the whole yard. They loved to organize scandals in the yard so that everyone could hear their profanity. It was quite a spectacle for the neighbors. Most of them looked out of their windows and balconies in a civilized manner. Well, rare people tried to take away the grief of the spouses. One such brave woman was Wendy. She considered it a necessity to observe the situation in the place where children walked and adults rested. Often she had to contend with identified alcoholics. In the middle of the night, who decided to have a heart-to-heart talk with their friends. She also dealt with suspicious teenagers who came to lounge on the benches. And she was the one who kicked out the screamers and scandalizers, disturbing people's sleep the night before another workday. She was grateful, of course, but at the same time few people even tried to help Wendy. Wendy loved, would discuss with the neighbors these 2 girls lonely away from other children and playing in the yard until late at night. This fact disliked and frightened her, but she didn't know how to help the little ones, or what to do with them. What if a maniac showed up here? She looked at Kate and Daria on the swings, sharing her worries with her neighbor Lucy from the second entrance. Lucy was indifferent to the late-night outings of other neighbors' children. Indifferent where? "Oh, come on. It's not like you're posting." Exhaling smoke from a cigarette, grinned Lucy. "Oh, enough of me for all the manky." There are little girls hanging around, with their clothes and holes all over the place. She was indignant. Look at the ballerinas. Look at Jacob. When was the last time they were sober? Wendy took a deep puff and looked at the card with a sad smile. Beautiful girl, so kind, so good. How could she be? Well, why do you look at these faces? Such to be certainly will not want to be, answered Lucy. It's time for bed, said Wendy. As usual, she went to the girls and asked them if it was time to go home. The kind-hearted woman realized that chasing the girls home to their inebriated and therefore inadequate parents was not the right thing to do. But it was at the same time the least evil of the two options available to them at the moment. Either Kate and Daria waited until it was so deep into the night, when their parents would normally be asleep, but risked running into dangerous people on the street. Or they come early and run into drunken profanity at best, but were still relatively safe. Such alternatives for little innocent creatures, upsetting Wendy almost every day, but there wasn't much more she could do for them. The next day, the yard was again full of workers. In it, as on a large theater stage, were lined up the usual mise-en-scene for those who liked to look out the window. Grandmothers were still sitting on the bench, teenagers were gathering near the garages, and on the playground small noisy children were playing. Even this noise had long been familiar to those around them. Another unpleasant incident disrupted all this order. It was not uncommon here. Maria ran into the yard, a girl of about 12 from a dysfunctional family. She was followed with heavy steps by a large, red-haired, short-cropped woman of about 50 years old. She was clearly angry, her cheeks red with anger and her eyes bulging. Said it all about her emotional state. These sounds, remotely resembling words, came out of her mouth and traveled all over the yard. A deaf mute lived nearby. Her name was Molly. She was often teased by the local boys, and some of them threw stones at her. That day she had a problem with Maria. For the girl immediately interceded local grandmothers, trying to stop angry Molly. But at the counter, the older women lashed out at the deaf mute. She first waved away, pushed their hands away, but then, saying something incomprehensible, sat down on a bench and calmed down. She took a breath. Still the grandmothers came closer to her. They saw Molly crying quietly. Come on, scratch the rivers. One of the old ladies came running in deaf and dumb. Molly sat on the bench for a while, as if thinking about something, took her dark blue cloth and her bag, which was almost empty. She took her dark blue and rag bag, which was almost empty, and went on her way. Girlfriends Kate and Daria watched this picture with horror. They then discussed Molly and Maria for a long time. What could she have so offended the poor invalid woman? The girls, like the grandmothers on the bench, were hardy creatures. They never liked it when the weak and unlikable were offended. And now they took pity on poor Molly, calling Maria a fool. The sun was shining brighter than usual. There were still many children, grandmothers, and adults on the streets, already having fun, singing alcoholic beverages, and not at all embarrassed by the large number of underage visitors to the palace. She could see the people of the playground and beyond from bottom to top. The girl was hanging from one of the yard turnstiles. It was one of her favorite things to do. Everything flipped upside down, giggling, she told her friend. Her blue t-shirt came down and distressed her small baby belly. You can see the belly button. Daria laughed. Mary on the turnbuckle. Kate was embarrassed and timidly took hold of the edges of the t-shirt and pulled it back up. Two little innocent angels were so carelessly playing and chatting about all sorts of silly things on the playground. And everyone had stopped their eyes on them at least once. They were cute, and at the same time in the eyes of these two beautiful creatures was already a lot of pain. And even a lot for 8-year-old girls. It was getting colder outside. A strong wind was falling. In a matter of minutes, the courtyard became completely quiet. Almost everyone had gone home. Thunder rumbled in the distance. On the bench sat a woman about 50 years old with bags. Probably found them from the store and sat down to rest. Daria and Kate were running around the yard, oblivious to the overcast weather and signs of an impending thunderstorm. The stranger on the bench was smiling, having watched the kids run around. The wind blew even harder. The sand soared into the sky. The girls squealed, "Oh," sand in the eye, straight shrieked. Kate, I'm going home, replied her friend. She quickly ran towards her driveway, looking around. Kate noticed only now. There wasn't a soul in the yard. This had happened before. So the girl said to herself, well, here I am again alone here. The only one she noticed was some strange lady with bags. The girl decided to approach her. Hello, do you need help carrying? She asked the woman. Oh, I can manage, my dear. What's your name? Answered the stranger Kate. I'm Miranda. Where do you live? I asked the children not far away. I was passing by your yard. Why aren't you home? Kate, look at the weather. The woman surprisingly quickly picked up the conversation with a strange child. While with interest, looking at her clothes, hands, facial features, the expression of her face from gloomy became smiling and interested. The girl was embarrassed. She was always trying to make conversation, so that it didn't descend into uncomfortable questions. Parents. And now, when asked about her reason for not wanting to go home, Kate sadly thought of making something up again. She had been silent for a long time, and Miranda, noticing this childish, innocent embarrassment, replied, Why don't you go home? There's a big hurricane coming anyway. Look, the sand has already risen into the sky. I'm not afraid. A few years ago, when I was like 4, I was alone on the street and it started. Well, then they took me away, but I almost flew away. The girl talked animatedly about the events of that terrible storm. Well, I immediately saw that you are a brave girl. Now run, Miranda replied. Her face broke into a smile of delight. Okay, Kate replied cheerfully. She walked slowly towards her house. The wind was still blowing. After a few more minutes, it started pouring rain in the city. Kate's parents, Anna and Jacob, were total scandalous alcoholics. The family was on the books as a dysfunctional family, and everyone knew their situation. The father and mother were quite young, and I was 40 years old and Jacob was 42. In addition to Kate, there was a boy named Tim. Where was he? During the summer vacations, nobody knew his 14 years. Or rather knew, but only the same nobody needed wandering in the yards of his friends' teenagers. They would run around the garages, play soccer, and drink beer. Questioning the local strange man, Tony bought them a couple 3 cans of wine at the store. When Anna met Jacob, they were both quite decent people and didn't drink that much. But genetics took their toll. Jacob's father was a heavy alcoholic. He caught almost all his scandals and quarrels with his mother, and one day he began to turn into that man. Anna, being an orphanage child, and therefore having no family model in front of her eyes, began to degenerate as a person. At first she drank with her husband to get less drunk. Then she became addicted to alcohol. Having no higher education, they could not find a job that would suit them. And now every time one of them got a new job, not even a month passed before they were fired. So the family got used to living at the expense of the state, and especially kind relatives of the buddies would lend them money. One of such was Anna Lucy's sister. The woman worked as an accountant in a construction company and could afford to give her sister a few $100 a month to support her favorite nephews. Miranda began to frequent this noisy courtyard full of unusual personalities and noisy children. Sometimes she was on her way from the store, and sometimes she would just walk by, pictured there to sit and watch the summer's carefree bustle of kids. She walked around, yes, around inside her mind for a long time. But when once again she saw the shy blonde-haired girl, Kate, and her friend knew for sure she wanted to see her. And it wasn't just a feeling of pity for the neglected child. It was something more. Wendy liked to go out on her little balcony on the 3rd floor, where a cat with little purple flowers was tied up on ropes, and the wire was converted to a parapet by an ashtray that was a tin can of Sprat. From there, she watched the life of the neighbors and just smoked. On one of those lazy days when there was no reason to go outside and just didn't feel like it, Wendy saw Miranda. She remembered that she had seen her before. She didn't like her presence in the yard. She doesn't talk to anyone. She's weird. What's the point of being here at all? The woman thought. Miranda sat on a bench. She didn't have any shopping to do this time. She seemed to have come here purposefully. Coming here, for the umpteenth time, she had never struck up a conversation with anyone. And to some she had already managed to be attracted. Miranda called out to Kate. She recognized the familiar face and, leaving Daria alone, ran up to Miranda. "Oh, hello. Are you here again?" the girl said with a childish, naive smile. "I'm here a lot now. I come here maybe 5 times. I've already answered here. The new picture is familiar. Come in, you live nearby." "Yes, I do." "You haven't been around for a while, have you?" Kate was shyly silent. Miranda realized that she had hurt the girl and hurried to reassure her. "It doesn't matter." "Well, not important. So the business was important. And who do you live with? Do you have a husband?" Kate asked. "No, I don't have a husband." "And children?" "No kids either." Miranda gloomed a little, but not for long. Next to her, 20 centimeters away from her, sat a curious little beauty who was as interested in the life of her interlocutor as she was. "Kate, you tell me, what do you do? Are you out with a friend?" Miranda also already knew what the girl had to deal with every day, and she wasn't even a little bit honest with her. This wasn't the 5th time she'd come here to the yard. She had been coming here for 2 whole months. The woman wanted to hear and see the noise and the fun, the child. And if other adults sometimes resented such an environment for Miranda, this yard was a fairy tale. Except for the hair, the girl with the big blue eyes was only the 2nd time she'd seen it. Not much of anything. "I don't know." Kate hesitated, twirling a strand of her blonde hair around her finger. "Sometimes we run around the garages." "Oh, don't tell anyone." She covered her mouth with her hands, glanced confusedly at the woman across the garages, barely concealing her indignation, and interjected Miranda. "It's dangerous, Kate. My husband shouldn't, but Daria and I like it." "But she's not allowed," the girl replied. "And you?" "I'm allowed to do anything." The girl grinned so uncharacteristically ironically for her age. Miranda felt uncomfortable. She realized, of course, what poor Kate was getting at. After that conversation, these 2 different souls became even closer. Every time a woman came into the yard, Kate would throw herself around her neck, screaming Miranda, and hugged her gently, asking about business. Miranda told her that she worked as a doctor in a private clinic, that she loved reading and traveling. Kate had never been farther than the nearest suburbs. She loved to listen to her new friend's stories about the pyramids of Egypt, the blue vast sea, and the big African elephant that dragged their fascinated passengers sitting in Hindi right on its own back. One such lively conversation Wendy overheard while standing on her favorite balcony with a cigarette. She realized that the girl's parents were probably in no condition to know about Kate's new friend, and felt it her duty to steer the woman away from the naive child. She saw Miranda as evil. One day, Wendy decided to talk to her. Kate was no longer in the yard. Miranda sat alone and stared at the burning windows of the houses. It was getting dark. She leisurely approached the bench where the stranger was sitting and addressed her. "Good evening." "Hello," Miranda replied. Wendy immediately there seemed to be consternation and uncertainty in her voice. That feeling was even stronger. Reinforced her suspicions. Nothing good about this woman, she thought. "Do you live here in these houses?" Wendy asked. "A little farther away. I like to vacation here." "Do you like the screams of our children?" Wendy laughed hostilely, sat down on the bench next to Miranda and smoked. "I like children. They don't annoy me," replied the stranger calmly. "Especially Kate. Do you like it?" The abrupt switch from you to you seemed to Miranda to show some hostility on the part of the interlocutor. "What do you want, woman? I'm just socializing with the kids. They come to me on their own. And, times are tough. And you know what, Kate, our kid, we're all watching her. And her parents are alcoholics. But we love that girl, and we're not gonna let her get hurt. I'm very happy for you. I don't know what you're getting at." Wendy was a fan of watching the news on TV on cold, cloudy days, when you did not want to go out, even to smoke on the balcony, often gained for his and hardships of the past, the heart and side pure. What is going on? At that time, rare were news about pedophile maniacs and people engaged in such black business as illegal transplantation, slavery, and drug business. All of these puzzles in her mind had formed an unpleasant picture. She was now more worried than ever about the fate of abandoned children like Kate and Daria. Wendy did not question Miranda. She felt it was her duty to declare her attitude toward the local children who were deprived of care and control from their parents. Yet after the conversation, she left the yard with mixed feelings. Or maybe really this woman was just a good-natured lover of children. But on the other hand, Wendy had seen a lot of things in her life, and once came to the conclusion that there is always evil everywhere and in everything. And now she did not understand the true intentions of the stranger, but as if she felt that there was something hostile in these intentions. Friday evening. It was as if there was a general picnic in the city. There were those who, without going out of town, even to the park, celebrated the beginning of the long-awaited weekend in the hot days right in their yards. The guests of our yard were no exception. Kebab cheerful and already a little tipsy. The crowd was making it right on the urn. Not too long ago painted bright green. Even though the time was no longer childish, there were still little kids running around the yard. They were the children of the very people who were making kebabs, heatedly discussing the latest news in the country and in their own yard. Is she the one who sat down? That's how he sat down. That's how he sat down again. Nick, what is it? Nick, what do the children want? That's about the kind of talk that came to innocent cats, little children. But they, being busy swinging on swings, running around and playing criminals, did not get into all the details of adult affairs. They only nodded among themselves when they heard swear words from drunken uncles and aunts. Kate was among these children. Her parents were very fond of summer vacations in the yard. One of the reasons for their addiction to such pastime was the most common laziness and impotence. Jacob and Anna did not like to go out for long periods of time beyond the yard or the grocery store, where they could buy inexpensive and tested alcohol. By 11 o'clock p.m., all the adults, they noted Friday, in the yard were pretty drunk. Their children were still out for a walk. They sat down on a separate empty bench and whispered anxiously about something, peering at the drunken groups of people they knew. Instead of cooking kebabs, it was noisier than it had been an hour ago. If the kids were quiet, the adults were louder, and it wasn't just talking. The guys, it was realized, were conflicted. The more alcohol these people put into themselves, the more they became bolder, more determined, and most importantly, more aggressive. Jacob was the one who yelled the most. He was hurt by the words of his friends, and he got into a fight with his fists. His wife Anna wanted to calm him down, but she realized that she could hardly stand on her feet, and she just did not have the strength to enter into the conflict between the men. Fortunately, this stormy dispute did not end in a fight. Jacob hysterically waved at his buddies, and Anna and Kate still stood for a long time. Sitting on the bench figures, urging to go home in the hands of the drunken father of the family was half-empty bottle, and he barely held it. The family's entreaties had no effect on Jacob, and he barely got up from the bench and headed deep into the houses unknown where and why. The next day, Kate was approached by a crowd of guys and girls about 12 or 13 years old. They smiled wryly, and some had embarrassment on their faces. "Kate, I think your dad's lying in the driveway," told my wife, and the others giggled that she didn't. She said thoughtfully and sadly, "Girl, yeah, there's your daddy lying drunk." Somebody in the crowd shouted, "Go look." Kate didn't go to the entrance of that house. She felt hurt and sad. It was shame for her own man. She was looked at and laughed at, jeered at, giggled at. And what was her fault? Toward her father, she developed a grudge that day, but she didn't know what to do with that feeling. Kate had hoped for years that things would change for the better in their family. She wanted to stop one day seeing those endless bottles of cigarette butts everywhere in the apartment. Kate wished that Tim's brother would spend less time with boys on the street. Wished they could all go to the movies together. Thought sometimes she was small, of course. The shy girl never shared her worries with her family or anyone else. The most painful thing for her was to see a prosperous mother and father walking with their children, daughter and son. She loved to observe such families closely, their habits, their gestures with a look. Somewhere subconsciously, she tried to understand what was wrong with her family. It is difficult for an 8-year-old child to make complex conclusions, and philosophize about the causes of certain events that occur in life. Therefore, without drawing any conclusions, Kate continued to live as normal children live, playing with friends, studying at school, and of course, dreaming. 2 weeks passed. Miranda did not appear in the yard. Wendy was telling the local grandmothers about how they were taking her out of the yard. Kate was constantly disappointed, going all day in the yard and not meeting this mysterious Aunt Miranda, who, like a fairy godmother, came down to her from the fairy heavens. Only the girl got used to a new bright person in her life. How did this man disappear? For her, it was a betrayal. But one day she came lightly down on the bench, a skinny, tall woman in a long blue dress and with a bag in her hands, filled with groceries, and exhaled heavily, as if she had been carrying heavy weights all day. Kate, seeing her from afar, rushed towards the bench. There was no limit to the child's delight. "Miranda!" shouted the girl, and abruptly braked, lunged right at the woman. They embraced and began to share with each other the news of the past days. Wendy wasn't the only one. Many did not understand this strange friendship and considered the stranger, if not dangerous. For a girl, this is a very strange oddity. Miranda herself at first could not answer why she had formed a friendship with this little girl. But those thoughts of doubt were quickly transformed. A clear purpose. Kate was no longer so shy to talk about her feelings, about her attitude towards her parents, and how sometimes she had to be ashamed of them. She had long considered whether to tell her about the unpleasant event that had happened with her father, because she had never before wanted to bring out the dirt and be frank about her family. But now that she felt complete trust in Miranda, the language had unleashed itself. Miranda listened silently to Kate and asked her nothing, for fear of hurting or offending her in any way. And at the same time, she was a very attentive interlocutor. Kate sometimes wondered how she could remember such details of her stories. Such interest of her new friend bought the girl up. "Miranda, do you have a mother?" Kate asked her. Sometimes, as is often the case with young children, she asked her companion the most sudden questions that stumped her. "Yes, there is Kate. Why do you ask?" "No, I'm just asking." "It happens. I just wanted to know." Miranda was curious in this girl. Even the most seemingly insignificant things were said by this woodland creature. Not for nothing. And the woman began to slowly consider meeting her as fate. It happened one hot July afternoon. First, Daria friend Kate, which was not at all peculiar to her, walked in the yard alone. Local grandmothers were surprised by such an event. "Daria." Aunt Tanya called her. "Why are you walking alone?" "Kate, where?" "Kate wasn't here, I don't know." Finally, it got dark in the courtyard. Kate was gone. "I wonder where Kate is." Do she and Daria walk together all the time? Wendy wondered. "I don't know," replied Tanya. "Still, I'm worried." Wendy went home to the AG's house. Her heart was not in the right place. They didn't open the door right away. Anna stood in the hallway, in a green robe with her hair shot up. The picture before Wendy was not the prettiest. Empty vodka bottles were lying everywhere. Jacob was lying on the bed, unconscious. "Where are the children?" Wendy asked worriedly. I don't get it." "Temka is in the room playing, sitting up," and the woman's petite face took on a completely different expression in an instant. She seemed to have remembered that she had a young daughter who didn't come home at 10 p.m. as usual. "She's not in the yard, Anna." "What yard?" "The time is 11 o'clock p.m., almost not anymore. She wasn't in the yard." For the first time in a long time, Kate's mother was in great anxiety. What to do now? Next rested her arms at her sides, walking over to the window. It happens so often with people that they think better as when the streetscapes appear before their eyes. She realized that by and large the girl's well-being was of interest only to her, and to some extent Anna, even though the alcohol had destroyed almost her entire personality. It was necessary to help this woman, and more importantly, to help Kate escape from trouble. The first thing that came to Wendy's mind was that the mysterious Miranda could harm the girl. Now it remained to figure out where to find this Miranda. No one knew where she lived. It was only known that it was somewhere nearby. Tim came out of his room. The boy looked out from behind him. He had probably just gotten out of bed and had absolutely no idea what the neighbor was doing here and why his mother was in such a state. "Hello, Aunt Wendy. What's wrong?" "Mom," he looked questioningly at my mother. "Kate's missing." "Missing how?" "Well, she's an emergency." After saying that, Tim went to change his clothes. He must have thought that there might not be much time left, and then there was nothing to be done. So he decided to act at once. 2 minutes later, the boy came out into the living room. He looked at his father lying on the bed. He was in a state. The loud talking had almost woken him up. He realized that it was about his daughter, but he also realized that he didn't feel like getting up to go out, and his excuse to himself was that he wouldn't. Tim looked at his mom and Aunt Wendy. They were the only ones in the whole world who felt real concern for the girl. The boy spoke firmly, "We have to get out." In a minute, the three of them were outside and completely unsure of where to go. It was all her comrades. "I was told that she was picking on her," Anna lamented. "What kind of creature and about what?" asked the boy. "Yes, Miranda is a woman. She and Daria and Kate socialize in the yard." "What? What does she want with little children?" "Rascal bastard. I think I know who we're talking about. Me and the boys saw her the other day. She was going into a house with some kind of archway. I remember Tim." "Yes. There's a reason you're wrong everywhere." Tim, with a bitter smile full of worry, said his mother, "Let's go there quickly." In the last 10 minutes, Anna had managed to sober up completely. Her perpetually detached look had changed to a look full of centeredness and desire to find her daughter. It was a brief rebirth into a real mother, ready for the sake of her child to make any sacrifice. The three almost jogged to the very house where Miranda supposedly lived. Wendy and Anna knew an elderly woman from that driveway. Of course, she was already peacefully asleep at the time, but there was nothing to be done. A child's life was at stake. They called apartment number 5. "Adriana, open up, please." "You're crazy. Perverts." You can see the voice of an older lady approaching the door. "Adriana, it's Wendy. Their daughter is missing." Wendy said impatiently. There was complete silence in the apartment. A moment later, there was a rustle and a heavy sigh from the landlady. She barely audibly muttered, "All right, I'll open the door while the children are here." The door was opened by a short, skinny woman of about 75. Her face was hollow with traces of former beauty. Her gray hair was rather short, but her evenly trimmed bangs, which adorned and ennobled her not young face, caught the eye. In appearance, she was good-natured and calm. "But I that my darlings, I did not see your daughter. I rarely go out," Adriana answered. "Do you know where Miranda lives? A woman in her 50s. She's been here a while. I think I asked her. But what is she?" "Is that what you're here for?" "I know, only she has nothing to do with it." "And you're a grandma. How do you know?" Anna started. The son hurried to calm down the nervous mother, who was on edge from the moment she learned about the disappearance of her daughter. "Mom, stop it. It's not about that. Miranda lives 1 floor above me. But you don't touch her. She's here to help me and feed the kitties on the street." Adriana wanted to say something else, but her uninvited guests were already hurrying up to the 3rd floor. Miranda opened the door almost immediately. "Good evening. What can I do for you?" Without a word, Anna, who stood in front of her, rudely pushed her into the corridor and walked briskly into the room. Miranda understood everything. She didn't resist or get in the way of these people. She understood. They had come looking for her favorite kitten. A few seconds later, Wendy and Tim entered as well. All three of them had been looking for the girl in Miranda's apartment, but saw that not only was she not here, but there was no sign of her. "I may ask what or who you are looking for in my apartment?" Miranda said, breaking the silence, the desperation of the girl's searchers. "We were looking for my sister Kate." "Sorry, we thought you had her," Tim replied sadly. "How did Kate disappear?" "Not that." The woman was surprised. "What do you know?" Wendy replied sharply. Her attitude towards Miranda was still prejudiced. "I've been in touch with the girl. She told me different stories. What did she tell you?" "You say we're going to lose her." Anna turned to the woman emotionally and with her hands on her head, slumped down on the blue couch that stood against the wall. Talking about some cars on sticks, She said she really wanted to go there but didn't know who to go with. Anna, Aunt Wendy, and Tim looked at each other. They all realized what kind of cars they were talking about. It was the local attraction near the Oriental Movie Theater. Almost running, they headed toward the place. "Wendy, I beg you, go home panting," asked the woman Anna. She saw that Wendy was in no condition to move so fast, and yet she was making attempts. "Yes, Auntie." "Wendy, we'll find it ourselves now." "Kate, we'll tell you everything at once." "All right, fuck it, I'll go. Don't wait up." An elderly woman of 67 years old slowly changed from running to walking and sat down on a bench near the living house. Only found alive, she thought. There was both fear and pain on her heart for this child, lost in every sense. Now there were two of them. The people closest to her were looking for Kate. They got to the rides that were about to close. "Have you seen a girl around here?" They approached the vacationers. Anna and her son began to describe her, but everyone was silent. Suddenly, someone from a noisy group of young people. She asked. "There was one." "We don't know." "There was a girl. Yours looked like they left about 5 minutes ago. She was with a man, like a man." Anna cried out. "Which way did they go?" "Over there to those 5-story buildings." The young man pointed to the gray paneled houses. Towering themselves among the other buildings, even more anxious mother and son ran towards the houses. They both knew. One of them had a dormitory run to this building. They rushed into the courtyard. Luckily, they saw Kate standing there with a suspicious man in his 30s. "You bastard. Get away from my baby. I'll call the police, you bastard." Anna threw herself at the man and he ran away. "Where are your eyes going?" Tim was moving towards him, but the mother shouted, "Tim, stop. The boy's boy won't catch up anyway. Let the bastard run." At home, the unhappy Kate was waiting for a conversation with her mother, and already having smelled something wrong, conducted to her father. After half an hour of screaming at the girl, the parents left her and went to bed. The clock in the living room showed 13. The next day, Kate did not leave the house. Miranda was worried about her. She sat in the yard for a long time, and then when she saw Aunt Wendy come into the yard, she immediately rushed over to her. "Wendy, hello. I'm sorry, I'm very worried about Kate." "What's wrong with her? Did you find her?" "Yeah, we found her all right." Wendy wasn't saying much. "And where is she?" "There's Daria playing alone again." "I don't know." "What do you care about other people's little kids? Why are you talking to me like that? What right do you have?" Miranda was indignant. "I just don't understand why you want this girl. She is not your daughter, not your relative. You don't know her parents. What do you want?" "I know Kate. She's an 8-year-old girl. You're not her company. What do you want from her?" Miranda kept repeating the same question. But Miranda didn't want to take on the role of a defendant trying to prove her innocence. Her parents are alcoholics. They almost lost the girl. What if I hadn't been there? Wendy remained silent. She realized that there was truth in the woman's words. Miranda continued, "And I have grown to love this girl, and I worry about her. I see how hard it is for her. She doesn't even want to go home when it gets dark. You see all this and you say to yourself, they're other people's kids. You don't have to interfere, but I'm just talking to her. To you, her mother's drunken face and abusive father are the best thing for the girl. You're asking me what I want. What do you want? What do you want? Do you want me to stop talking to her? Would that make her life easier? I don't know. I sense danger in you. Kate just needs a friend. She needs someone who will listen to her and understand her. I never hurt her, but her own parents, they're monsters. They could be a danger to her, not her parents, not her mother. You have no right to discuss her. Why don't you take care of your own children?" Wendy decided to talk about it not because she did not understand the elementary rules of ethics when she became acquainted with a person. You should not bring up serious topics without knowing anything about his fate. No, she asked the question because she wanted to expose Miranda. To understand what motivated her to communicate with Kate. It's my private life. I don't have to answer to anyone. All I'm saying is that Kate's in danger. I want to do something to help her. Both women were left with their own opinions and feelings after the conversation. But Miranda was more right that day than ever. In fact, her words became prophetic. Kate did not leave the house, and the next morning and evening, no one had seen her for over a week since she had met a man on the street near the yard who was extremely dangerous to small children. She had met death itself, which she had managed to avoid thanks to a new friend named Miranda, Aunt Wendy, and her own mother and brother. But nothing good awaited the girl at home, and life had not changed for the better. In the morning, the father and mother were even angrier and more aggressive than at night. They had both sobered up. Anna told her husband about Kate's adventures in detail, and here was the intention to teach the daughter a lesson. These individuals did not want to think about the fact that their daughter was first of all a small, not thinking child who required attention, care, and most importantly, upbringing. They wanted to take out their anger and dissatisfaction with life on Kate. And that was that. Even the day before, having found herself in terrible trouble, having avoided it, the next day the girl got to the new parents, and having waited for the usual departure of the 14-year-old son from home beat the girl. Anna, of course, did not hit the child hard. She more shouted and controlled the actions of a scoundrel husband, who beat his own child with a belt and bare hands. After a while, the perverts realized that the girl had not risen from bed for a long time. On the pillow, they found traces of blood. Kate had to leave the hospital. She received serious beatings. The cruel parents worried not at all for her health, the girls as much as for the fact that they would have to answer for their actions to the doctors, and maybe even to the court. Before going to the hospital, of course, they had to come up with some sort of legend to explain such severe injuries on the little girl's face and body. The doctors in the emergency room looked at each other. They weren't just looking at the child. The appearance of her parents made them realize the girl had been beaten by them. The young medic smiled at her colleague. It was, of course, a smile of irony. How many times had they encountered similar tales of a bad fall or a collision with a lamppost? Meanwhile, the nature of the injuries was obvious. It was a beautiful hot summer on July's cheerful, noisy days. Kate lay in a children's hospital on her bunk and looked out the window, dreaming of getting out of those gloomy, unpleasant four walls sooner. The only thing she was grateful for about this place was the temporary protection from her hated relatives. She missed her friend Daria, the other neighborhood children. Despite not having much contact with them, Kate was already starting to reminisce about school. She wanted to go to 3rd grade. She also thought of her adult friend Miranda and wondered if she would be worried about her absence. She really cared about this stranger's feelings. She was no longer such a stranger to her. On the contrary, there was something native in her voice and in her smile. In spite of all the care the doctors had taken of little Kate at the time of her discharge, she was almost healthy, but she was not able to regain her original aesthetic appearance. Still on her face were bruises of the mortgage. But the girl did not worry about it. After all, ahead was a meeting with her dear and close people. After the home beating, Kate began to appreciate the friendship with Daria and Miranda even more. She walked out into the courtyard. All eyes that day were directed toward her, and even though Kate was a little girl, everyone could feel her bruises and looked at her with special attention and interest. "Hi," a friend hurried to hug the girl. "Hi, Daria, I missed you." "Oh, what's wrong with you?" "Did someone beat you up?" "I fell." "You fell really hard." Yeah, Aunt Miranda asked about you a lot. She was worried." "I know she was. That's okay. I'll see you soon." Daria asked about the details of the fall for a long time, of course, not realizing that she was hurting her friend and that she was being as inept and childish as she could, twisting and making up stories. So uncomfortable and hurtful. Kate hadn't been in a long time. She caught herself in a complicated and unchildlike thought. I already have to lie to hide all these nightmares from others. And with that, she firmly decided, I don't want to lie like this for the rest of my life. But as usual, she didn't know what to do to make her life, which was still just beginning, change for the better. Miranda was not in the yard that day. This circumstance upset Kate. Still, she was glad to be back in such a familiar and native place as the courtyard. At the same time, at the sight of the entryway of her own house, she grew gloomy and depressed. Even her feet were showing. And with all her body and soul, she wanted to stay away from that place. When she was left in the yard, as always, almost the last one to arrive, she made her way to the entrance. She felt bad thoughts overpowering her. There was panic. Each step was given to the girl with heaviness. It was as if more and more shackles were being shackled to her feet. She stood by the front door for about 5 minutes and pondered. I don't want to go there. I really don't. I'd rather live on the street or at Aunt Miranda's. I don't want to live with them. I hate them. Why isn't Aunt Miranda my mom? It would be better for everyone. For the first time, a thought occurred to the girl. It was so strange and yet logical. To live with Aunt Miranda. She did not want to impose on anyone and realized that her thought would not turn into reality. Meanwhile, tired, long ago lonely, and unhappy doctor-gynecologist counseling pregnant and planned pregnancy women. Lying in her dark room on a soft couch, she stared up at a black dot on the ceiling. Her eyes were so focused, as if she was contemplating her future life in that dot. In fact, she was. She liked to think, dream, fantasize. On a weekday after work. And as a rule, everyone had her even well mapped out. The available thoughts ended with painful digging herself and reminiscing about the mistakes of the past years. So she started with a vague future and ended with a heavy past, which now and then pressed an incomprehensible weight on her. Now, it was true. Her habitual thoughts were often supplanted by thoughts of little but very brightness. Youngsters from the sun named Kate. She was alarmed at the sudden disappearance of the girl. Still, she was always glad to think of her and the innocent nonsense she loved so much. Their meeting took place almost 2 weeks after the next time they saw each other. Miranda, meeting the girl near their favorite shop, was both pleased and chagrined. But she did not question her about anything. Kate, as usual, started talking about her love of butterflies, about the bright star she had seen the day before in the sky about classmates, and about how she wanted to go to school and was thinking about how difficult it would be for her in 3rd grade. Miranda, like the girl herself, acted like her little one's face. Her friends didn't change, even though it was difficult for her mentally. As Kate told her her next stories, she had conjectures, conclusions, and possible solutions. It was them. It was her inadequate parents. Swirling around in her mind were angry women, only it was just like Kate's. She had no way out of this terrible situation, in which an innocent child suffered and had long since chosen the streets of the neighborhood, in which dysfunction and danger reigned supreme. Always those girls snooping around. The locals were talking about Kate and Dasha. They didn't like it, and they understood the reasons for the girls' new wanderings on the street. But no one wanted or saw any point in doing anything to help them. And why should they? The kids had parents. And that meant that everything that could happen to the children was only on their conscience. What's fair then? The first person who really took an interest in Kate's plight was Miranda. She was lonely. Not long ago, her husband had left the woman. They'd been married for 20 years. It was a difficult decision for the two of them, especially Miranda. She loved Will. She gave him all the comforts of home, warmth, love, care. But most importantly, since some time for Will was to hear, finally, the cries of the baby, though beautifully furnished, but so quiet apartment. Miranda was 52. The last few years had been the most active for her in terms of having a baby. She had convinced herself and her husband that everything would work out, even though she was at such an inappropriate age for childbearing. A year ago, William turned 51. Do you realize it's a shame to have a baby at this age? What? Ashamed. Miranda quietly, timidly, and at the same time with a slight note of complaint turned to her husband. So you're ashamed of me? Miranda, you're not. I'm just tired already. Of what? I'm 47. You're 51. We should just calm down, you know. All I know is that we can't give up. All the money that's been spent on this. Exactly, William said. What's the point? It's no use. This conversation was especially bitter for the women. They had been married for so many years. And now, after the hurtful words, the union had a good chance of falling apart after many years. William also worked in midwifery, and lately it had become hard for him to do this important business of delivering women. After all, his beloved had never given him a child. The decision to leave Miranda was not easy for him, but he did not make it overnight. William simply postponed it for another year. He loved her, but her prolonged and hopeless infertility sometimes frustrated him to such an extent that the only solution he saw was separation. Will felt himself growing colder to his wife, to her problems, to her successes, and even her joy when she smiled and laughed. All he did was squeeze a smile out of himself. 52-year-old gynecologist Miranda Fede. Of course, she saw Lyubimov's changes, but she didn't want to accept them. She let him go with the thoughts that he, like her, was tired of being devastated. At first, Miranda supported the former spouse, calling him and inquiring about his health mood. But things changed. In a moment, she learned that her native beloved William will marry for the second time, and the chosen one was a young girl, a nurse named Kelly. Miranda knew her, and I knew her. They often saw each other at the order of authorship. The girl was sweet and modest. She was pretty, but she was immature, felt nothing for her but reveled in her youth. She had no idea that a certain nonverbal relationship had already developed between them, that little by little was destroying her already shaky marriage. Miranda later learned that Kelly was pregnant. She made a difficult decision for herself that day. She moved out of the neighborhood where she and Vidya had met and lived, where she had worked for over 10 years, and had been calling for a private perinatal clinic for a long time. And she, as if sensing that one day these people would be useful to her, did not refuse them, citing the impossibility of getting a job with them due to various difficulties. Miranda began to breathe hard again, and again stumbling over her ex-husband's personal life information. It became unbearable. William tried to avoid her so as not to hurt her feelings, but they worked in the same place. This meant that meetings, though rare, were inevitable. She moved to a disadvantaged neighborhood, but living there was geographically convenient for the weekday commute. Here she saw for the first time this little girl, who touched the most delicate strings of her soul. The thought of children never faded in her mind. She still wished to have a child and even planned to go to an orphanage. But the acquaintance and further nice, kind conversations with Kate all had postponed that trip. She was already interested. There were other children. For her, as for other real moms, they were strangers' children. One had so imperceptibly and quickly become her own. Another already less tense conversation with Wendy seemed to gather all Miranda's thoughts into one decision. She didn't understand what she had heard from her neighbor, but she felt that she understood everything. Again you asked the approaching Miranda, holding the bags in her hands. Me again. You know I live nearby. Maybe I'm not allowed to sit in the neighbor's yard now. You start acting like you want to. Just as weird as I am. All right, that's enough of that. Where do you go grocery shopping? You live online, and we all go to a 10 instead of a meeting. Well, I can go there too, she answered indifferently. Clearly, she was thinking about something else. I was not very concentrated on the conversation. There was silence between the women. A light summer breeze ruffled the blonde strands of hair that came out from under Marina's crap. She looked away toward the noisy roadway. Miranda, are you married? I'm not. And children? Miranda didn't answer. Wendy didn't bother asking her. She suddenly thought of her family of gays. And these alcoholics are our 2 children. Tim and Kate is your favorite, but she herself is an orphanage. Miranda asked thoughtfully, what a wedding we had here. We partied all night. They went to a restaurant. It was such a PR, I don't know where he found her. And then the bottle. And that was it. There's a lot of people like that around here. It's just the most scandalous ones. Miranda eagerly caught every word from Aunt Wendy, looking for salvation and a way out of the situation. And when she got home with bags full of food and lay down on her blue couch, she began to have intrusive thoughts. Not an alcoholic. The orphanage, so Kate doesn't know her grandmother. So what? Why are you telling yourself all this? No, what's the big deal? It's August. The kids were starting to feel a little bit more like school was approaching. Some were anxious, some were excited. And there were those who were especially pragmatic, who thought that it would be good to use the last summer money to the fullest, without thinking about the future. but as it got significantly colder outside. Neighbors smoking on the balcony was no longer observed. In the yard, such a noisy large crowd of children became noticeably quieter and calmer. It was a quiet, calm, and cool day. Kate went outside in a light pale green jacket. Daria was not in the street. She was walking alone, daydreaming about something, and occasionally daring to step into a sprint. Her mind was whirling merrily, swapping one for another. Childish, funny, ridiculous, and just plain fun thoughts. Miranda came later. She called out to the girl. "Kate, hi. How are you doing?" "Miranda, hi. I'm good. How are you?" She walked over to her friend and saw that she looked puzzled about something. Miranda had been really thoughtful since morning and afternoon at work. And now that she'd met Kate. "Miranda, you look sad," the kid said. "I was just thinking, my good ones." "About what?" "About you, Kate. I think about you a lot now about me." "What's there to think about me about?" After a moment, the woman said uncertainly, "How are you like me?" "Yes. Do you like star butterflies too?" The girl smiled. "No, my girl. You and I are alike in more ways than just that. You're my kin, you're my kin." Kate didn't understand what Miranda was getting at. Miranda was silent. She was uncomfortable with something she had already considered several times, something that had been long ago decided by her. Now it was so hard to voice to this trusting little angel. So reluctant to deceive her. "I am your grandmother." Quietly, she said. "But it can't be loud." Having said these words, the girl took a deep breath and covered her mouth with her palms. "I don't have a grandmother. I don't have a mom. She's from the orphanage. I know, Kate, your mom was taken away from me a long time ago. And now I found you, Tim. You have your daughter. Your mom upset me. I don't want to know anything about her. She's hurting you. So mom doesn't know about you, but you know everything now." Miranda wanted to make one very important, unexpected suggestion to the girl, but restrained herself, thinking that today she had enough information, which was not only shocking, but also false. This woman had suffered much in her life. It was a long time for him, in spite of his efforts and righteous living, to face the fact that she could not once again have a child. A small and sharp blow was the betrayal of her husband. Of course, all these events had affected Miranda, and she was no longer the same. The moral boundaries within her were erased. It seemed that she was ready for the most any stupid, rash, and terrible step. She thought long and hard about the neglected blue-eyed girl named Kate. And finally, she had made up her mind. She was going to steal her away from her family. Miranda was at the stage of thinking out her course of action. She had no margin for error. A mistake meant a complete failure in life, closing the last door to at least this late personal happiness. That in her case meant imprisonment. Miranda realized if she was caught, she would not survive the shame and imprisonment. Careful and cautious, the dweller of the house with the arch was not only watching Kate. She already knew quite a bit about her parents, her brother, those who might have caused the threat. One of them was Aunt Wendy. Miranda learned that the grief her parents had found as of late had been in a terrible drunkenness and had seen and understood little of the world. Those we came home less and less often. Rumors that Anna and Jacob were in an inadequate state spread from bench to bench, from yard to yard, with the speed of the first August leaves falling to the ground. Everyone knew the couple hadn't left the house in weeks, unless it was to replenish their supply of alcohol, which at the time was vital to them. The day of the false confession, Miranda was still a little doubtful about the correctness of her action and further plans. She sat at home in the semi-darkness and pondered. But for each of her inner questions, she found the answer that was the justification she so desperately needed. That night, she was like Raskolnikov, dividing people into the creature or the entitled. Miranda wondered to herself, why am I afraid to put the girl out of her misery? Does she really have the right to have and raise children? Where is the justice? As time went on, the questions became fewer, and in their place were now mostly statements that Miranda, of course, thought were correct. Alcoholics aren't human. Kate has a right to be happy, and I will make her happy. Why have I been tormented all my life? Why is it fate that I don't have children? I've done everything for this. Will I not be rewarded for it and have an outlet? Miranda interrupted her heavy meditations. Crying. She became unbearable, sad and afraid. She feared for herself in case of failure. She feared for the girl in case something inside her did flinch. And she put it like that. But she lost her tears and looked at the homemade bracelets made of small, colorful glass balls that Kate had given her the day before. I'm still going to save this girl by all means. They met again. Kate knew where her adult friend lived, and Miranda invited her over. It was early weekend morning, about 8 o'clock or a little earlier. That way the risk of being seen by the locals was reduced many times over. Miranda was afraid that Kate would not want to go far away for a long time and with a stranger from her family. She loved Tema, though she rarely saw her. She loved the place she lived in. She also loved the school and the teachers. Thoughts of the girl's possible disagreement were now perhaps the only obstacle to her goal. Miranda looked at Kate seagully, hers practically gone. The girl had been surprisingly cheerful and alert that day, but that she didn't tell anyone anything like I asked Kate to. What's wrong with you? No? In a whisper, Kate said. Kate, I have a serious conversation to have with you. Just please think yourself well. The girl looked intently at Miranda. Kate, I want us to go away, go to my place. This place outside the city forever. Asked the girl. She was even more surprised and confused than when she had heard that the mysterious woman turned out to be a grandmother. This question was one of those that Miranda had not thought through at all. What was the best answer? To lie again or to tell it like it was? She didn't want to lie to the girl again after that big deception. But her reaction scared her. Kate was terrified, and in her eyes she could read it. A sudden sadness came over her. She was a child after all. And her parents, no matter how they sometimes showed themselves, were her family. And most importantly, she loved her brother Tim. Not for a year, or maybe 2, I want to, and then we'll come over. What will Mom and Dad say? I mean, they'll fight. I've talked it over with them. Unfortunately, there's no time for goodbyes. If we don't leave, we'll never leave now. A decision. The girl laughed for a long time and looked at the floor. Occasionally, she glanced at Miranda, and the latter just stared at the unfortunate child, whose life could change abruptly in a moment. And what was wildest of all, she had to decide her fate here and now. Okay, we'll go, I've decided. Miranda exhaled deeply and trying to hide her extreme satisfaction from the psychological work done. The woman already had everything ready. Clothes, warm summer shoes, hygiene products, books, skew to the road. All this fit into a dense bag and a large backpack. Miranda did not want to attract unnecessary attention with a big bulky suitcase. Her task was to leave the city limits with her child as discreetly as possible. They boarded a bus first, then another, then a third. That too was part of the precaution. But on the bus, there was no need to show identification. After all, it was dangerous to leave any traces in the form of information about themselves. Miranda had distant relatives she had visited when she was young. It was a village far from the city. Not abandoned, but dying out. Mostly old people lived there. And life there had a slower and more measured pace. No one quarreled, no one fought. People went about their daily lives and went to the store 5 kilometers away. They talked to each other on the benches. And sometimes they just admired the view from the window. They watched the birds of the sunset from the branches of the trees. If someone was in the habit of coming here every 10 years, that person would not notice that something was changing. Even the villagers appeared the same. After decades, there was a magic to this place. The townspeople called the village by the humble name of Bull's Bermuda Triangle. Kate, to the delight of her new grandmother, had been like a child in her first days in the village, neither picky nor fussy. The environment was calm and quiet, but it was quite difficult for an 8-year-old girl to change her routine. Miranda drew water for the 2 of them from a well. Washing had to be done in a narrow wooden house with a wooden floor. On a stand lay an old mill. There was a bar of white soap stuck to it, which had already turned to stone, making it impossible to wash properly. Fortunately, Miranda had all the necessary hygiene products with her. She loved wood to heat the house. It was a most amusing sight for urban Kate. She'd seen wood chopping, of course, but only on TV. and they were all strong, sturdy men. And here the grandmother herself was engaged in such unladylike labor. After a couple of days of living in the cabin, which was, by the way, despite all the inconveniences, quite cozy for living in it, Miranda and Kate had a conversation. The woman wanted to secure herself and her once more from the people who would certainly be looking for them. Glasses of delicious toffee tea were left on the table. Kate returned to the house after a hike to a nearby grove. But what found mushrooms only one girl sadly showed her grandmother. "Do not worry, come fall. We'll go with you to the forest full of them to pick them." Kate sat down at the table. She took a glass in her hands and began to give up steam, going to the hot toffee tea, inhaling with her nostrils. His beautiful forest scent. Miranda looked at the girl and thought about the fact that she was still in danger. What if people came? What if word of the girl's disappearance was already going around the country? She remembered that look of instant sobering and a mother ready to kill her Kate when she came to her in that one. What was she capable of? She didn't know. One had to be reassured. No matter how calm and detached the inhabitants were, anything could happen. "Kate, I have something to ask you," Miranda said shyly. Kate had already drunk tea and started on the cookies. "Aha," the girl replied nonchalantly. "You could call me Mom." Kate could not answer this question immediately. A week ago, the person sitting across from her was just Miranda. A few days ago, her own grandmother, and now she was asking for something more difficult for a young child to understand. "I know it's difficult, but it's necessary. But I have a mom." Miranda did not coax the girl. She decided that she herself would indirectly encourage Kate to do so. Now she addressed her not only as Kate, but also as daughter. She looked quite young for her 52 years and afterward. "Kate, it was so wild for me one day to still address her as Mom." Kate's appearance also underwent a change. Long hair going all the way down to her elbows. Hers was now short and the ends barely touched her shoulders. Meanwhile, while Kate and Miranda, drinking tea in the village cottage, heated by the seal of the couple and only noticed that the daughter disappeared from the house and did not appear for more than 3 days. To make such a conclusion, they were helped by Tim. The boy, too, had been leaning here and there with his friends all this time. And it so happened that he just ran from the hallway to his room or slept there, and also quickly removed in the morning to the street. The boy was exposed to the influence of drinking company. There were 16-year-olds among them, and they all knew about beer, vodka, and cognacs firsthand. Tim got bored, just hanging around the streets of the neighborhood. So he joined the older guys. Now his summer everyday life consisted of fun drinking with grown-up guys and girls, mopeds, and alcohol. Theme: all these 3 days felt something wrong, but could not understand what was wrong. She was living her own life, where there was almost no room for family. And although he loved Kate, but for a while he forgot about her that day when he decided to relax at home longer and play an online game with friends. The older brother remembered that his little sister didn't annoy him like before, didn't ask him about anything, and didn't ask to sit at the computer. He didn't see her in the yard when he came home. Tim went into his parents' room. They were both in the mid-afternoon state. "Mom, Dad, where's Kate?" Anna got up on the bed and held out her palm from behind the back of her eye. "Kate. Jacob. Jacob, have you seen Kate today?" The man, awake, still didn't understand what the housemates wanted him to do. "Kate, gone. Don't you understand?" His wife yelled at him. "What do you mean she's gone? She's not missing. She's walking around the yards." From despair and indifference, Jacob, she slowly sank into the chair and grabbed her head with her hands. What a nightmare. Kate, she cried for the first time for her daughter, rather than risk never seeing the girl again, and something told her that now there would be no happy ending. Just as it had been when they had searched for Kate with Tim and Wendy. The day they realized Kate was missing, the neighborhood police were called in. And the very next day, the whole town was looking for the little girl. On almost every post and on every bulletin board in the city hung a black and white portrait of Kate, a beautiful, blue-eyed girl with a kind smile and gorgeous, long, blonde mustache hair. The case of missing 8-year-old Kate quickly spread across the country. Every region was involved in the search for the missing girl to a greater or lesser extent. Of course, when visiting the police station, they never forgot to mention a certain Miranda, who had lived in a neighboring house for some time and was friends with Kate. "She's the one who stole the girl. I know for sure we should look for her," said the desperate women. But it turned out that Miranda was living in the apartment illegally, and no documents were provided to the landlord. A second case arose, and the police took up the search for the owner of the apartment. All these problems were even more waiting to get on the trail of the kidnapper. It turned out that no one could say anything about this woman. Especially the police did not want to develop a man who was not seen for anything criminal, except for socializing with a little girl. It wasn't clear to anyone, including the investigators. They sat in a small, stuffy office with old furniture and already retired from modern technology computer, turning on everything once in a while and discussed cases. There were two of them, a young investigator, Andrew, and a senior police lieutenant, Michael. But that's what it wants from us, angry as a cattle. It's her own fault that the girl is missing. But you can see from her face that she was beating her. Come on, Michael. We got a kid to find. Who we got in the pipeline? No one. You remember what that broad said about that sketchy janitor who left with the girl? I think that's him. And Miranda is some kind of fairy tale creature. Basically, if we work hard enough, we'll find her. We can do a sketch based on the mother's description, canvass the neighborhood. Andrew, let's not do that yet. We'll look for this asshole for now. And the aunt is for just talking to the little one now. Do we have to bring everybody up? It seems to me that after these two words, Andrew became silent, which could have cost him the revelations that he was suddenly so eager to express. What do you think? It seems to me that if they were looking for the daughter of some local oligarch, they'd find Miranda, this one, and anyone else. Andrew's still young. Senior Lieutenant Michael's conclusion was completely inappropriate and ill-considered. It carried no hidden meaning except that Andrew was really physiologically young. With such phrases, the chief subdued the ardor of energetic employees who, as he believed, had not yet known real life. So the investigators agreed that Miranda should be excluded from the suspects, especially since the investigation had no information about her. Miranda. Having been alive for a month now, Kate never lost her guard. When she came to town for a necessary occupation, she came across a photograph with a familiar face on one of the lampposts. It was Kate. The woman became uneasy. She found the nearest bench and sat on it. But here I am, a criminal. I've stolen someone else's child. But how unfair is life? Miranda in general lately more and more agreed with that inner self, which once pushed her to deceive Kate, and later to kidnap her. She played the role of savior, sincerely not understanding, and not accepting the outside world and people around. All people seemed to her not decent, evil, and worthy only of punishment and retribution. And she also fell in love with the word fate. Everything that happened to her and her Kate, she called this word. But none of it was a dialogue with her friends or coworkers. It was a dialogue with herself. Talking to Miranda was not something she was afraid to do with anyone. Getting unnecessarily caught up with people in whom she saw only hostility. The town Miranda traveled to was small. The local police knew about the village, but they did not disturb this small world cut off from civilization. We won't stick anything in the village. There is nothing there to scare the locals with all sorts of passions, the head of the department told her charges. 3 months passed. The cold November has come. Nature had seemed to rise one day after a long wait and reward all living things with the sharp colors and fragrant smells of spring. Tim was on his way back from school. He was no longer part of the company of those murderous boys. Interacting with them had fatally, he believed, affected his life and the lives of his family. He walked down the dark corners of the streets, and his heart could not, with the pain of the darkness, remembered his sister again. How little time I spent with her. I should have been watching her and helping her. I hate you. The boy had never been fond of his parents. But now he would come home to lock himself in his room until morning and head off to school again. A strange feeling attended the boys. It was as if Kate had ceased to exist for him. He still hoped that she would show up one day, but that hope was fading with each passing day. He walked into the hallway. The apartment was quiet. Street concerts, squabbles, and shouts carried from the neighboring courtyard. It had been a long time since the neighbors had been heard. And in general, they were less and less mentioned by the locals. Only the grandmothers, when they saw the gloomy Anna walking towards the wine store, murmured among themselves, discussing the woman's hard fate. What a pity for her, they said. Only Wendy did not consider this character a victim. She was the only one who seemed to know something and was never embarrassed at the sight of Kate's mother walking down the street. While the child was being searched for all over the city and people around her were discussing this horrifying event, she was calm. The subject, as a muffled voice came from the kitchen. It was Mom. Tim didn't answer anything and headed towards his room. Tim called out to his mother even more quietly. The boy reluctantly walked into the kitchen. He saw a pathetic creature that very roughly resembled a woman. Anna's face had grown coarser and was covered with numerous wrinkles and puffy. Her hair, as usual, had an unwashed and unkempt look. She smelled like she hadn't showered in a week. Maybe she hadn't. I haven't heard anything, nothing new. Do you think she'll be back? I don't know, exhaled the subject to the press. Tim sat down opposite. There was an ashtray on the table. One of the bowls was also downing his only cigarette. The boy saw a tear on his mother's cheek. She rested her fist, and her forehead and sobs looked at the floor. The picture is my daughter. The subject was in a state of stupor. He pitied his mother, but the feeling did not leave him. The boy realized that all these tears and worries were the payment for leaving them once, leaving the one who needed them all. Even though he saw in his mother a kind of rebirth, it had even pleasantly surprised him at one point. But the thought of Kate being gone, with them, brought him back to a harsh reality where there was no room for any positivity. Still, he instinctively got up from his chair and walked over to Tim's mother, put his arms around her, and whispered, "It's not your fault. Don't torture yourself. I love you." November replaced December, and later winter replaced spring. It was especially painful for Kate's family to spend time in the backyard of the house, the very noisy realm of children where Kate loved to spend time. Both Tim and his parents. After several times visiting the palace, they decided not to go there anymore and began to avoid the place. But time moved inexorably on, turning fresh wounds into scars and fresh memories into emptiness. Kate grew up and well. When she turned 15, it wasn't enough to have her mother's books and an old TV with 2 channels. The girl had no friends and no phone. She was a real schoolgirl. And if her mother wasn't around, she would go feral. Miranda became sick more often. The woman was 61 years old. Her only help and doctor was her daughter Kate. She left inside her this fear for her beloved and only being on Earth, and in 7 years never made friends or even acquaintances. And if Kate was enough for her and replaced her friend, companion, assistant, and psychologist, the young, beautiful girl was just hungry for new acquaintances and a new, modern, comfortable life. Miranda let her go to town more and more often, but asked her to be quiet, cautious, and not to contact anyone. The girl spent her time at the movies, in cafes, and shopping malls. Fortunately, her mother was able to give her money for such entertainment, who threw quite a decent amount of money on her account every month. And she also wrote scientific papers and articles to order. One day it all happened. Kate made a friend, a guy named Alex. He was urban and a little older than her. Kate told her mother that she was going for a walk around the city alone, but she was in the company of a nice young man. When Alex found out that her friend didn't have a phone, he briefly bought her one as a gift as a token of friendship. When the mother found out such careless purchases, she became displeased, almost escalating into rage. "Kate, we agreed no cell phones." She was indignant. "But I'm an adult. Look, I have a different outlook on life. And what are yours? Tell me, Miranda asked in a mocking tone. "I think you can't hide from people. I don't understand why we've been doing this for so many years. I've explained it to you. We are being chased by people, dangerous people." By the way, Miranda had said a lot of things to Kate in those 7 years. A lot of things, often things that had nothing to do with reality. Once you deceive someone, it's easier to deceive them again. So there's a whole chain of lies being built up. Before Miranda knew it, this style of communicating with her daughter had become habitual. Here Kate, too, became dishonest and mature with her. She asked herself questions to which she could not find answers. And slowly it became clear to her. Miranda had been deceiving her for a long time. Lately, the girl had even become annoyed by her excessive concern for her. Constant warnings and advice that sounded like orders. Phrases, "I'm worried about you. You're my only family, and I wish you nothing but good things." Being always comforting, we kindly began to push her away. Dangerous people. What kind of people are these? Maybe you mean your daughter? Which daughter? Miranda, upon asking Kate about it, immediately realized that Kate meant her alcoholic mother. And she was quick to correct herself. "Anna, I was starting to forget that she was my daughter." This conversation had been on her mind for a long time. She did not understand how you could love your granddaughter and forget that you have a daughter. She now had even more distrust for the man she was living with. This whole picture of life was no longer comfortable and familiar to her. Kate, like a bird, wanted to jump out of this not at all golden cage and smell somewhere far away. More and more often she imagined her father, her brother, and her mother. Kate missed them. Kate began to see Alex more and more often. She was also taking English classes now, and she was both scared and pleased to finally feel socialized, where there were people her age, young female students, college students, and professors everywhere, who were all educated, interesting individuals. She finally had the opportunity to socialize and came to this decision on her own. Kate was cramped in a village where the most interesting entertainment was watching an old TV with two barely working channels. They met after the course and went outside to the park. They were out in the springtime. Beautiful people were watching the most lush bluing of nature. It was the beginning of May. Alex had heard some things about Miranda already and didn't always understand his and Kate's relationship. He was interested in his girlfriend's life and one day decided to have a serious conversation with her. "Kate, I got that right. She's not your birth mother. She's my grandmother. She once asked me to call her mom. I did. Don't you miss yours? I do. But if I leave too, she can't stand it. She once said if I left, I shouldn't come back. Kate, it's all manipulation. You have to realize that. What does that mean?" Kate read science fiction, of course, but the versatility of her communication was sometimes lacking. She didn't know many modern phrases, fashion trends. Alex was a savior for her in this world. Everything that seemed strange to the girl. For example, when watching a movie, she would check with her friend. "That means, Kate, she controls your emotions. She knows you feel sorry for her and pressures you to do so." "Yes, that's true. But what do we do?" "Do you want to see your family? I want to see my brother." "I don't know if I want to see the people who ruined my childhood. Grandma, she saved me from them. But she stole you." This sudden conclusion Alex kind of shook Kate's mind. She thought for the first time that Miranda's act could, in fact, be considered kidnapping. Stolen, but she said it was best for me. "I was beaten, Alex. They drank. They were never interested. I understand. But you understand, too. She had no right to do that to these people." Kate that day was the first time she thought so deeply about the possible feelings of her first family. What if they're still hurting? What if they're looking for me? What if Grandma hadn't discussed anything with them? Alex's words were now unsettling, and it seemed he was right. Kate was determined to get her way. But how to make sure that her grandmother, to whom she owed a lot, would not be offended? One beautiful May evening they had a conversation. Did Kate spend a long time going round and round? Yes, around, talking about how much she would like to see her brother Tim, but saw that her grandmother was not very willing to talk about relatives. "I've been meaning to ask you for a long time, why didn't you take the subject with us? He's your grandson too. He was a big boy, he wouldn't have gone. I talked to him, he made his decision. But why would you want to take away my ability to communicate with him?" "Kate, this is hard for me to talk about." Miranda realized that Kate was backing her into a corner with this kind of questioning. What was she to say about a teenage boy she had only seen a couple times? The woman's lies were amplified. The girl's curiosity grew more and more sophisticated. "I want to go to them. I'll go decisively, Kate cut Kate off. No, that's not even up for discussion. You and I have talked about it. Won't you take me back? If I come, are you going to kick me out? No, 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 emotionally shouted the woman. After a moment of calming down and catching her breath, she answered much quieter than before, as if to close the subject of all the girls' long-standing requests and complaints. They're dead, all of them. That it couldn't be. Kate didn't get up from her chair, but it is. Miranda, sitting on the chair in front of the dining table, rested her face in the palms of her hands. She wasn't crying, she wasn't hiding her tears, as people who want their emotions not to be seen by those around them usually do. She was hiding the absence of tears, she was hiding the shame of another lie. Another 10 years passed. Kate was 25. At this age, she had to experience another of the most bitter losses of her life. Her own beloved grandmother had died, though she was personally surrounded by more and more secrets with each passing year. Kate loved her sometimes strange, sometimes cruel, but very loving and caring grandmother Miranda. By this time, the girl had already had a serious relationship with Alexei, the very guy who often spurred her to assert her rights in communication with her grandmother. As cynical as it may sound, but only after the death of Miranda, Kate decided to take the step that her beloved had been waiting for her for 5 whole years. She told him yes, and it was 2 days after the funeral. Miranda, still towards the end of her life, accepted Alex, because she realized the girl would need care and support. After all, except for her real grandmother and a young man, she had no one in this world. At least she convinced her of that. Kate, coming to the native cozy little house where she grew up and comprehended life through books. Communicating with her grandmother Miranda was happy and sad. She realized I was entering a new life, but something seemed to put her down. And it wasn't just the death of a dear and close person. Kate felt that the death of her grandmother did not close all her spiritual worries and eternal state of anxiety. Her heart was still out of place. Both mind and body had been calling to Kate always since the day of Miranda's death. And here she was, surrounded by objects and furniture that had once been so familiar to her. She had learned the roughness in the holes and birthmarks of each. Strangely, the girl caught herself thinking that she had never laid or even sat on her grandmother's bed. She slowly walked over to it and sat down on it. That dark green bedspread that her grandmother used to cover her bed with. That red patterned rug that always gave the house a special atmosphere and coziness so cheerful in the apartment. Those intricate figures on the carpet always brought the girl back to the past. Kate threw her head back and cried. She was to be married soon, but for some reason doubts were creeping into her soul. The girl didn't want to start a new page of life, not having sorted out the old ones yet. A lot of questions hung in her soul. What happened to her relatives? Why had her grandmother taken her so far away? And why was she only worried about her? By the way, wanted answers to all these questions. And those answers came. When she calmed down and wiped her tears away with her hand, she turned to the wall and saw something white between us. It was deeply hidden. And yet, as if on purpose, part of it was peeking through the gap. Kate tried to get it out, but failed. Then she found a pair of scissors in her grandmother's old jewelry box. The name, she grasped the edge and pulled out the whole thing. It was a piece of paper folded in 4. Having discovered an interesting find, the girl hurried with it to the light. She sat down by the window and unfolded the sheet. Kate immediately recognized the familiar handwriting. It was Miranda's grandmother's. Her hands were covered with cold, sweat, and even trembled slightly. She didn't know the contents of the letter, of course, and couldn't even guess what it would say. But for some reason, she felt that her life would change drastically after reading it. Kate read the following lines. Dear Kate, you know and see how sick I am. Every day could be my last. I try to see you more often, to see your smile and how happy you are. Yes, I want to tell you again, taking your Alex, there is so much I want to tell you right now, but unfortunately I am pathetic and cowardly. I only ask you for one thing. Let this be my last will and testament. Not, cursing me for what I'm about to tell you now. I'm not your grandmother, I'm not your mother, I'm nothing to you. But I loved you very much when I saw you on the playground. You were an angel to me then, and I'm an unhappy man. an unhappy woman who met betrayal, deceit, and pain along the way. I could never have children. The man I loved left me, and he and I lived together for 20 years. You appeared to me just at the moment when the darkness in my soul closed everything alive. I'm grateful for that, but I've been lying to you all this time. I saw how worried you were about your family. I know who left you with those bruises on your face and your body, and I so didn't want them to do it again. My heart is breaking with pain. I'm a liar. I stole you. I kidnapped you. They were looking for you. They were all looking for you, Kate. I know that. But the scariest, most important thing I lied about is that your brother, your mother and father, they're alive. Yes, they're alive. They're still living in Chicago. If you've forgiven them, and go there soon. Being a mother is the greatest value in life. I've experienced it because of you. Kate sat on the bed for a few minutes in a state of complete stupor. She didn't believe the words that were written on the piece of paper. She didn't want to believe that her grandmother had cruelly deceived her all these years. And at the same time, it was as if she had learned what she had longed to know, and all the secrets that had kept her in suspense were revealed. She, in general, got what she wanted, and now she was ready, probably to burn this message and erase in herself all memory to kill all desire to know the truth. The girl did not cry, which seemed strange to her. She tried to squeeze a single tear out of herself, but failed. Now her mind was dominated by the thought of going to her relatives. 3 days after the bitter discovery in the gap between the betrayed walls, she finally made up her mind. Kate had packed her backpack, had already written Alex a message. Alex, my family is alive. I'm going away. I'll be there in a few days or weeks. I'll explain everything. I'll tell you later. Kate sat at the small table in the kitchen where she had once had tea with her grandmother. She had decided that for the rest of her life, Miranda would be remembered as her own person. The resentment toward her lasted for a few hours, and later all that remained was pity. She took a seat on the path her things were already waiting for her in the hallway. The girl looked out the unwashed window at the courtyard. It would seem that she had waited so long for this moment. She had despaired so much when she learned of the death of her loved ones, and even regretted holding blackness in her heart for her mother and father. She had been so uplifted when she realized they were all alive, but something seemed to stop her from making this trip. It was hard for her to say, too. There's nothing you can do about it. When feelings bloom inside you, bad or good but they're all so ingrained in your head that every day, from waking up to falling asleep, you hear them, feel them, live with them, and a similar strong feeling came over Kate. She couldn't figure out what it was, fear or resentment or rejection. But it was strong behind the sea of energy, of feeling. She thought, whatever the deception was, everything that happened to me, from the moment I was kidnapped and moved away, led me to what is happening to me today. She was happy with Alex. Her soul and mind remained pure and not corrupted from city life. She looked at her watch. She had already missed the first bus of its kind.
Subscribe and click the bell.
The Posh Club was packed to the brim. Today, a famous rock band was performing here, and rich spectators, who had booked tables in advance, were lazily sipping cocktails, smiling and chatting, shortening their time in the VIP zone. Fireworks. A young guy in branded ripped jeans and a Versus jacket plopped down on the empty seat. Oh, there's our lion. A blonde girl in a dress, more like a combination, caught his shoulder with long shining fingernails and imprinted a long and bright kiss on his cheek. Where the hell are you? They're about to start. They won't start without me. Grinning, the boy replied, Fine him, fine him, fine him for being late. The girl shouted, Pour. Someone's obliging hands quickly filled the glasses with viscous, amber-colored liquid. Here you go, thank you. The guy tilted his head slightly and downed the contents in one fell swoop. Cheers, cheers. The audience echoed once again, supporting the simple toasts. And as if on cue, the duty musical accompaniment began to wane. The lights went out, except for the dim little table lamps on the VIP tables, and the stage was illuminated with bright flashes of rapidly changing electric lights. Quickly galloping, shaking guitars, performers jumped on stage, and the hall exploded with screams and squeals, banging and whistling. The audience sang along to the musicians with pleasure, especially at the table where sat a recently arrived guy, the owner of a bright appearance on which foolish, gullible girls bite so much. His whole life at a more or less conscious age had gone on brightly and viciously. He knew no denial or lack of anything, and whatever he desired was always entirely at his service, whether it was people or things. Liam, as he was called by his parents, was from a family of a financial tycoon, owner of factories, cars, steamships, in the words of a famous poet. From childhood, he was sure that the whole world was created for people like him, and of course, for him to a much greater extent. No one ever dared to contradict him. In a private kindergarten, if the teachers tried something timidly object to his pranks, they immediately lost their jobs. At home, his mother only wiped away tears, trying to instill in her son at least some norms of accepted behavior. And his father, a stern man with a rich criminal past, only encouraged the hare. He was sure that otherwise he would grow up to be a wimp. In this world, you need time to bring everyone to their knees before someone else does it to you. He often said to his growing son. The son learned his lesson to the fullest. Already in school, of course, also private, he so skillfully mocked the teachers that they, notwithstanding, changed like gloves. After school, he studied abroad and in more than one place. In fact, in prestigious British universities, where you need not only to have a lot of money, but also to behave decently, Liam did not stay long. There, both he and his father were just politely shown the door, issuing, however, the appropriate documents on the completion of the number of semesters that he was able to hold out. And since he only needed a piece of paper for his education, nobody demanded anything more from him. A warm place under the sun, Liam, had already been secured before he was born, and the papers would be good enough to hang in a golden frame on the wall of a fancy office. Thus, having completed his education, the young major seamlessly and organically joined the community of the same, like himself, pro-lifers, regulars of nightclubs, regular buyers of elite boutiques, owners of expensive yachts and racing cars, the price tag of which was calculated by the same number of zeros, which equaled their rich inner world. During the day, these bats and predatory werewolves in branded rags sleep in their expensive caves, decorated according to the latest fashion, and towards evening, when the working people flock, barely moving in kilometer-long traffic jams to their miserable shacks, the majors come out into the light, which is no longer light, but a blue twilight, filled with the smell of wealth and luxury. This is how Liam's existence rolled along the dark nocturnal establishments, which sooner or later had to end in the same place where all other mortal beings find their last shelter. But the strongest of the world do not believe in it. They are touchingly sure that neither disease nor death itself has no power over them. And at this time in the provincial wilderness, in a village called Addicks, lived a simple American family. The core of the village, and the only workplace for a couple hundred residents, was a half-breed farm. The family of Jacob and Nancy produced 6 fairly healthy children, the oldest of whom was Kathy. The first in line and the first helper to her mother, worn out by endless hard work and incessant labor. From a young age, Kathy learned the hardship and beauty of a simple life in nature, away from the noise and smog of the metropolis. Even the center of the village seemed to her, accustomed to the simple monotonous routine of village life, sparkling fireworks of celebration. That's because they were there only on holidays. At agricultural fairs, where they sold honestly grown with their own hands, fruits and vegetables, and bought rare sweets which had never been in their village, chocolates, and Eskimo. Kathy, even at the age of 15, rejoiced at this simple gift of fate like a child. At the same age, she was bought her first adult dress and shoes with heels, to wear to the disco, to the village club. "Look, Kathy," her mother told her. "Don't you dare grow up again. Your father and I won't change your outfit every year." Kathy only lowered her eyelashes obediently. She never paid her parents back. They saved on everything. Kathy's daily routine was to rise at 5:30, no matter what time of year it was, wash up with ice water from a bucket for half a minute, and feed the cattle, cows, pigs, goats. Then Mother went to milk, and Kathy at that time prepared breakfast for the whole family: porridge, boiled eggs, bread from yesterday's dough, emitted a huge bubble in a wooden bowl. There were enough troubles in the village, but there were good things too. Does life consist only of everyday life and difficulties? And snow slides and summer berries, a field of spaciousness, the smell of honey, strawberries, and herbs. How did you go mushrooming? What baskets did you carry? Carrot tops, shining caps with copper greens, were salted in large basins, transferred into fried glass jars and into the cellar. The closest of Kathy's family was an old grandmother, her father's mother. She lived in a separate half of the house and was widowed long ago. She also helped with the household, digging in the vegetable garden, as they say. Of all her grandchildren, Grandmother loved Kathy the most. She took her to her house for a sleepover, gave her tea with herbs, baked pancakes, and sometimes let her sleep in the morning. But most of all, Kathy loved her grandmother's stories. Grandmother knew a lot of stories about mermaids living in the pool, about unknown animals that deep in the forest buried, about mysterious creatures that live near us, behind the stove, under the bench, in old baths. Little Kathy listened to it, opening her mouth, and then retold it to her mother and the younger ones, for which her mother always scolded her grandmother, saying, "Why do you make a child's head up?" Growing up, Kathy did not hurry to share information, more and more whispered with her grandmother and no one, not giving away the secrets learned. She collected herbs and berries with her, went for mushrooms far from home, and was not afraid to get lost. By the age of 20, she became a pretty girl with a long, thick braid and thoughtful gray eyes. And in the big city, life was boiling. After another board meeting, her father told Liam to stay late. Waiting until the office was empty and signaling to the secretary to bring drinks, he gestured to the leather chairs. "Sit down." Liam nonchalantly unfolded himself, lazily sipping his coffee. Now he's going to get his brains straightened out, he thought, but he had not expected how far his ancestor would go in that direction. "It's time for you to settle down. You're already 30. His father had a habit of speaking in short, succinct sentences. "We need to make a suitable match." "What?" "I don't understand." "It's time for you to get married." "That's what?" Father said angrily. "Do you have anyone in mind?" Liam was confused. There are plenty of such goodies. Father made an angry face. "I'm not talking about tramps. There's always plenty of that. But Brown, you don't marry street girls. I hope you realize that." "Yes." Liam nodded. He knew from experience that when his father was in such a mood, it was better not to contradict him. "I'm waiting for your nomination." A little softer, his father said, "She should be cute, but not too much and not spoiled." The latter I emphasize, especially. We don't want other people's children. You never know what's in a woman's belly if she's slept with a lot of men before you. Where am I going to get one of those? Sincerely surprised. In our time, wherever you want." Father shouted, "Not my concern." "Any other questions?" He squinted. "Yes." The son nodded his head. "How are you going to check that you're not spoiled?" "Because you're definitely going to. I know you are." "You're right," nodded the father. "But it won't be me, but the doctor. And if the girl doesn't agree to such conditions." Liam grinned. "Then you'll look for another one." Shrugged his father. "You have a month for everything, so do your best." When his son left the office, his father took a deep breath, went to the bar hidden in the wall, and poured himself an undiluted chivas, added ice, stirred, and walked to the huge window separating his office from the outside world. Behind this transparent wall life was boiling. The endless streams of the avenue crawled. People were walking back and forth, cranes, lifting their iron-long arms to the sky, and a narrow strip of concrete encased in the river glistened between this delightful bustle. James loved life, loved the movement, the hustle, loved to manage it all and punish those who made a bad fuss. He had gotten so caught up in running the world that he hadn't noticed his own role had come to an end. Only a few pages left, 6 months at best. He would never have grandchildren, but at least he would have made a beginning. That's how he decided to end his earthly managerial endeavors. Think about it. Meanwhile, Liam said to his friend, pouring tequila on his grief, "Now find him a girl who hasn't been kissed. What century does he live in? Should I look for her in kindergarten? I'm sick of your attitude. Why in the kindergarten?" The interlocutor smirked. "There are simpler options. You know, there are such fans, just this kind of strawberries." Well, Liam was interested. Where do they pick them? "In the villages," he said, putting his foot on his leg and smiling. "In the village clubs." In the village clubs? Liam had absolutely no idea what that was. His world consisted of metropolitan mazes, foreign resorts, and clean European towns. "Look," his friend patiently told him. "You take a car, type in the Navigator Rural Club, and choose some on the horns of hell there. You go there on Friday or Saturday night, and that's where they're herding." "Are you sure?" Liam frowned. "How long would it take to get there? And if we use wings?" "What are you doing?" My friend laughed. "Wings do not fly there, if only wild geese." "For real?" "Is there really such a thing?" Liam thought, holding the leather steering wheel of his cool Audi with one hand. The old man's going mad. He drove off alone, so as not to embarrass himself by jabbing his finger into the middle of the list. There was a country club in Addicks. That's where he'd rushed off to get this idiotic task over with. He wasn't going to get married at all. Liam was really angry with his father, but there was nothing he could do about it. To hell with him. He'd get his own daughter-in-law if he had to. But I'm not going to jump around like a chained man. We'll sit in the house, as glued and children to do. That thought calmed the furious Liam down a bit. A few hours later, tired and sleep-deprived, he finally reached the end point of his route. He got out of the car and swore out loud. He had never seen such squalor before. The low one-story building made of gray, sometimes painted bricks, most of all resembled a stable. In his mind, of course. Enclosed by a low wooden fence painted a cheerful blue, it was hideous. Liam spat angrily and stepped closer. The peeling sign indicated that this was it. Sighing and reminding himself of his father, he stepped inside. "Who do you want?" The voice of an elderly aunt sitting at a table near the entrance made him wince. So confidently stony-faced was it. No one had ever dared to address him like that, but there was nothing to do, and he made a semblance of a smile on his face. "Do you have a disco here?" "Disco?" The aunt raised her painted eyebrows and smirked. "Well, here. But it's a bit early. Did you show up? You're not from around here?" "You look right, Kikimora." Liam snapped at her mentally. But he asked only when the beginning, when the young people have done all the work. The aunt laughed. "Maybe at 8 o'clock. Strange, I was told it starts early here." Liam grumbled. "Where is the nearest restaurant?" "Restaurant?" The janitor laughed. "What the hell?" Liam turned around and went to the car to wait for the disco to open. So he fell asleep, and when he opened his eyes it was already dark around, and all the windows in the club were shining brightly. Going into the dance hall, he expected to see anything but this. Between two low windows covered with faded yellow curtains, on a polished coffee table, stood a tape recorder, an old model he'd never seen before, and 2 speakers in wooden cases. On chairs along the walls sat girls in colorful dresses with curls and bright Barbie-style makeup. In the middle of a room the size of the bathroom of their mansion, on the creaky boardwalk floor, 3 couples were stomping in a slow dance. The guys were openly groping the girls, and they were giggling and making eyes at them. At the sight of the guy who entered, all heads turned toward him. The girls' eyes rounded, the guys tensed. Liam walked in silently and sank down on a vacant chair with worn upholstery. The chair beneath him crunched suspiciously. "What am I doing here?" Liam thought in anguish and rage, looking frankly at the astonished girls sitting next to him. The farther ones were whispering and giggling, looking at each other and covering their mouths with their palms, and those closer to him sat like at a funeral, eyes down, hands on their knees. Inviting those who don't dance. His friend's instruction flashed through his head, and he stood up resolutely, walking along the row of seated girls. "May I invite you?" Leaning over and putting out his arm bent at the elbow, he said to the first one with a long braid. You could sweep the floor, he thought, at the sight of this luxurious and natural maiden's jewelry. She looked up at him with serious eyes. "Me?" There was surprise and even fear in her voice. "You." He confirmed it with a radiant smile. The girl cautiously rose shyly, hiding her hands in the folds of her dress. Liam didn't have much idea how to dance to such strange things coming from the rattling speakers, but it was easy. Hugging his chosen one and shuffling his feet from one end of the room to the other, he soon achieved the same results as everyone else. The next song gave out at a different tempo, and everyone seated gradually joined in the dancing. Fidgeting to such music, Liam was no longer able and suggested to his lady to go out for a smoke. "I don't smoke." Shyly, she said, lowering her eyes again. "Really?" Liam marveled. "Looks like the right specimen." It went through his head. "Let's just get some air, shall we?" He said and led her away to the blue fence. "Let's get acquainted. I'm Liam." "Kathy," she said quietly and blushed. Liam marveled. He lit a cigarette, blowing the smoke away so it wouldn't blow in her face, and he didn't know what to talk to her about. "Where are you from?" she asked after a while. "I haven't seen you here before." "From the city," he said. It was necessary to keep incognito for the time being, so as not to scare off any frightened prey. "I'm here as a guest." Instead of answering, she only smiled, in that simple way that only his mother smiled at him. Her eyes, it seemed, could be searched to the very bottom of his soul and see nothing there but the same things on the surface. "You know, Kathy." Liam was about to tell an inspired lie, but he didn't know how to approach it. "I have to go now, but I'll be back for sure." And after a pause, he added, lowering his voice and looking her in the eye, "To you." The next day, the whole neighborhood was buzzing like a disturbed beehive. In some century, in their remote corner, there had been at least some worthwhile event. The arrival at the village club of a strange guy in a fancy car here was tantamount to the arrival of a prince under scarlet sails. The fact that Kathy was playing the part of Assel only added fuel to the fire, for she was considered by a small margin ahead of Cindy, the prettiest girl in this little world. Did you hear that, girls? Wendy the saleswoman was singing. Kathy, we've got a prince. Oh, it's no good. Kathy's grandmother lamented. Princes don't just appear out of the blue. Why are you talking about bad things, Grandma? Kathy smiled, comforting her. Besides, I'm not going to go out with him. It doesn't matter, sorrowed Grandma. Believe me, I've seen a lot of them. Meanwhile, Liam was consulting with the very friend who had taught him where to find a decent bride. Okay, here we go. Kevin said, tell her that you're looking for a man with a pure soul who could heal your wounded heart, but without too many details, that she's the one you've been looking for all your life. And most importantly, that she and she alone could save you. Why save me? What a load of crap. The consequences of unhappy love, brother. Kevin laughed. From what else? I can't believe she'd fall for a divorce like that. You'll see. His buddy laughed shortly. Can we bet, if you're ready? Fuck you. Liam waved his hand. We don't have enough to do. A week later, he came again and told Kathy everything Kevin had taught him. But again, she just looked at him with her knave eyes and smiled. Kathy, putting as much tender feeling into his voice as he was even capable of, Liam looked at her with a long, penetrating stare. Kathy, look at me. I'm just not myself. I don't eat. I don't drink. I don't sleep. Take pity on me, please. What do you want? The girl flapped her eyes in confusion. Well, for starters, I want us to get on a first-name basis. Liam smiled. How about it? Come on. Kathy smiled embarrassedly. And this time Liam left with nothing and was getting a little pissed off. His father only gave him 1 month, and this village idiot, even you, can't tell him. How could it be before the wedding? Together with Kevin, they decided that it was time to use the heavy artillery to get acquainted with his parents. Now Liam did not wait for the next weekend and arrived in the middle of the week, having found out in the administration, Kathy address, and came right to the court. He, of course, almost threw up from the unfolding picture of simple village life, but he courageously restrained himself. He took out of the car a huge bouquet of roses for his mother-in-law, a bottle of Chivas for his father-in-law, a whole bag of sweet nonsense for Kathy, and another bouquet of white roses for her, and a small modest box. In the box was a ring, and her mother only gasped when she saw the gem. Kathy, Liam, pictorially dropped to one knee, thinking only of how not to kill the suit pants. I fell in love with you at first sight. All girls pale before your beauty. Please, will you marry me? His chosen one was standing in the middle of the common room, completely confused. The whole scene didn't fit the interior of their rustic cottage, but it was the same with Cinderella and Prince Charming. Don't even think about it. Her mother persuaded her. Happiness will come to you. Do you really want to spend your whole life here? Just like me? Look around you. You're looking at the same thing here. Shoveling manure and having babies. Good man, daughter, solid, said the father, looking at the cupboard, where his wife had thoughtfully put the coveted bottle. What else to expect? Such are not lying on the road, and only Grandma remained true to herself. Kathy, ask your heart, and you'll know if you need such a fate. This man doesn't seem real to me. Where did he even come from? Kathy honestly recounted to her grandmother everything Liam had told her. I don't know. The old woman frowned. He doesn't look unhappy. Oh, he didn't. What's the rush? Kathy didn't know what she was thinking or what she really wanted. Really, this is my only chance to get out of here, she thought to herself. When she thought of Liam, however, her heart was absolutely calm, and she felt nothing but flattering pleasure at the fact that such an interesting and wealthy young man had chosen her out of all the girls in the world. You'll be a fool if you don't leave, her friend Molly told her. If I had such an offer, I would not think for a second. And so it came to pass that Kathy was of the same opinion. You don't turn down a chance like this, and rightly so, Molly assured her. So what if you don't like it? Divorce and that's that. We do not live in the Middle Ages. Almost at the end of his father's deadline, Liam finally persuaded Kathy to go and meet his parents. Seeing her in the same dove dress, he wrinkled his nose in displeasure. Put on something else, something more modern. There's nothing else. Kathy was embarrassed and tears came to her eyes. All right, it's nothing. Liam caught himself, afraid of scaring her off again. We'll go with you to the store and you'll choose something yourself. He took her to an expensive boutique where Kathy was completely confused. For one thing, it was only on the way that she found out where he was taking her. And then she had never traveled further than the center of the village in her life. Even the town next to the village was almost space to her, not like Los Angeles itself. The savvy consultants, seeing the situation, took the couple in stride and dragged Kathy into the fitting room, leading her, like a fashion show, to Liam. As a result, a classic cut suit with a skirt was approved because the girl absolutely refused to wear pants. Liam looked critically at her pale, bare legs, but however, slender and not badly shaped, and decided that a week or two in a good cosmetology salon would make something acceptable out of her. They took a bag, sunglasses, a silk handkerchief and gloves, and the salesman, very happy with today's proceeds, smiled at them with dazzling fake smiles. Hello. Kathy smiled politely at Liam's parents, her eyes wide open, looking around the chic mansion. Hello, darling. Her mother stepped towards them, hugging her future daughter-in-law affectionately. Good afternoon. Father seemed to look approvingly, or Liam only wanted it that way. Let's go to the table. The mother invited her son with Kathy. The servants have already said everything long ago. We've been waiting for you. We've stopped by, Liam said, sinking contentedly into a soft chair. That's why we were delayed. Lunch was tolerable. Mother kept asking Kathy about her family, about her parents, about where she studied. Her father listened, occasionally throwing in a line or two, raising an eyebrow. Kathy splayed her hands, apologized, and ran out from the table into the hallway where her bags of belongings stood. Returning a moment later, she handed Liam's mother a small bundle. Please take this. I embroidered it myself. Blushing, she almost whispered. A gift for you. Vanessa shrieked, ran in, hugged Kathy, spread the rug on the small table. Women, what can you take from them? After lunch, she and Kathy went out into the garden, and from there came the same delighted gasps. Only now the girl was admiring the flower beds and fountains, and Liam and her father were in the smoking room, opposite the big English window. Well then, said James, you've met the deadline. Well done, but for God's sake, tell me, what swamp did you fish her out of? What difference does it make? Liam shrugged. The main condition is fulfilled. She's absolutely clean. It seems so. Agreed, Father. Now we have to take care of the formalities. Do I have to do that too? Liam jumped up. You could be the one to do it. Father grinned. But I'm afraid you'd fail miserably. No, I've put my mother in charge. She's a woman and she can find the right words. And then you'll have to sign a prenup. You think that's going to be okay? I don't think she'll even ask what the paper in front of her is. Liam grinned contemptuously. Good, nodded his father. Now for the main thing. Lion was wary. Try hard to get Kathy pregnant as soon as possible. Father said tiredly, Do you understand me? But what's not to understand? Liam stretched himself. We'll do it. But what's the rush? None of your business. Father snapped at me. My mother and I want grandchildren. Consider it a parental whim. The wedding was scheduled in a week. All the necessary formalities went really quite smoothly. Vanessa, who had managed to find a common language with Kathy, convinced her of the necessity of the examination procedure. And she didn't read the prenup, just as Liam had predicted. But not because she didn't understand, no. She understood perfectly well that rich parents didn't want their property to fall into the wrong hands. But it seemed to her not as an offense, but as an additional proof of Liam's seriousness of intentions. He is not afraid of parental anger, marrying a girl from the village, who, of course, everyone considers a hunter of other people's goods, but not him. Her chosen one is not like that. He is kind and noble, and he loves her. Why else would he have her? There are 1,000 girls in front of him, all ready to run at the drop of a hat. Oh, if Kathy knew why this family needed her. These people didn't think of any love at all, least of all Liam. Maybe only his mother had any feelings for her future daughter-in-law, and her father needed her, very much, but only as a perfect incubator. Kathy's relatives were not invited to the ceremony. It was explained to her that it was not their custom. Liam promised her to go to her parents and other relatives afterwards to organize a real village wedding. Promised and forgot. Kathy's mother cried, her father yelled and freaked out, but Liam quickly calmed them down with some money handed over in an envelope, telling them it was for upcoming wedding expenses. After considering how much they had been allocated for expenses, the mother immediately calmed down, smiled, and agreed to everything. The father, who received a case of whiskey in addition to the expenses, was no longer upset. Well, it is clear they are all cool city people. We are no match for them. Let them, and we'll celebrate in our own way. They had to celebrate without the young people, who immediately after the city wedding flew to a distant foreign resort. Kathy sent pictures that took the whole village by surprise. How lucky some people are. Sighed enviously friends. What a lottery ticket. Dan, but why did he choose her? Kathy herself was as if in a parallel universe. In 1 month, her whole life had changed 180 degrees. She was now a married woman, and her husband, who looked like a foreign movie actor, had thrown the whole world at her feet. At least it seemed that way to her. After the Italian resort, they returned to Los Angeles, where a new mansion, a little smaller than her parents', but no less chic, was waiting for them. Father and mother, welcoming their son and his wife to their home, inquired casually whether they could expect grandchildren soon. Kathy became embarrassed, turned pink, and lowered her eyes, but said nothing. At home, Liam asked her, "Why did you react like that to a simple question?" She blushed again, just as she had the first time they met. It was her strange peculiarity, Liam thought, that irritated him a little at times, and quietly she answered, "I didn't want to tell you until I was sure." No way! Liam was so happy he fussed, sat her in the chair, looked into her eyes, and even ordered the servant to bring tea and milk. That's great. He looked at her with such joyful eyes that Kathy cried from happiness. But you're sure now? Yes, she nodded. Let's go to the doctor tomorrow and find out for sure, okay? Liam already imagined how he would solemnly present to his father the proof of his male achievements. The fact that he would soon become a father himself didn't excite Liam much. In fact, he was getting a little tired of Kathy. All these silly raptures on any occasion, absolute unsuitability for modern life. She even tried to clean the hotel. But here, could any normal person imagine such a thing? He remembered the face of the maid who had come to the room and found the rich guest dusting. It wasn't that Kathy disgusted him at all. Sometimes she was quite nice. All this naive innocence of hers had fascinated him at first, but the farther she was with him, the more he became irritated by her rudeness, her stupid simplicity, her complete lack of elementary ideas about anything. It was very stressful that everything had to be explained to her, chewed up the simplest, most obvious things. Yes, she didn't even know how to use a smartphone and woke up awfully early, disturbing his sleep, and in the evening she gave him no rest, dragging him from the bar to the hotel room, whining like a little girl. Well, can we go now, honey? Don't call me that. One day he couldn't take it anymore and shouted at her. What do you think I am, honey? Just call me Liam, whatever you say. Kathy readily agreed, and that annoyed him too. Her constant desire to please, to anticipate his every wish like an intrusive servant. Lion, do you want tea? I can go and get it. The waiter brings the tea here. And no, I don't want tea. Waiter, a glass of Beaujolais, per favor. Kathy was embarrassed to go to the beach in her swimsuit. Liam literally dragged her out blushing like a cancer. They're all watching. Kathy looked at the people around her with tears in her eyes. Eventually converged on the floor transparent Perio. Liam felt like a loser who had married an ugly woman. Although Kathy was quite beautiful, and if she had been able to present herself, it would have been great, but that option was not available to her. And there were many other small details that were accumulating like a snowball. That's why today, when Liam learned that everything had worked out, and it was possible to give his father a ready report, so to speak, he rejoiced like a child. And Kathy thought he was happy as a child, without any how. Great son! James was indeed pleased with his report. They met in the office one-on-one. Liam wanted to present this news without Kathy, who was, in fact, only a tool to achieve the goal. And now that goal had been achieved, one could use something more serious for such news. My father was looking at the ultrasound photos, specially enlarged in A4 format. Liam had thought of it himself, specially asked the doctors. You know, my father has poor eyesight, and I want to make the old man happy. Kathy again saw this as a touching family concern and smiled happily. You know, I have unexpected news for you. The woman doctor smiled, raising her eyes from the monitor. Look here. They both scrutinized the screen, not finding anything at all clear to them. Right here, see. The woman pointed with a special wand, like a short pointer. There should be one heartbeat here. But we have two. She finished solemnly. Liam stared dumbly at the screen, not understanding anything, and Kathy, suddenly realizing the meaning of what had been said, gave her stupid habitual gasp and clamped her mouth shut, holding back happy sobs. We're having twins. Yes, and different egg twins at that, nodded the doctor. What? Liam was worried when he heard the terms he didn't understand at all. Don't worry, there is nothing wrong with them. The doctor smiled. They just developed from two different eggs and will not look like twins. They may even be opposite sexes. Oh my God, Kathy was overjoyed. We are going to have two babies, Liam. She had forgotten that she shouldn't even call him that. But now he had something to surprise his father with. Don't you see anything strange here? He asked him, grinning. What should I see? James was wary, sensing a trick. But I don't know. Liam said, for example, that you'll soon be the grandfather of not one, but two grandchildren. Really? My father just soared above the sinful earth. He made the old man happy. He even hugged his son, which he hadn't done for a long time. And I think he even wept, or was it just Liam? Adriana, he rushed to the intercom. Adriana, my soul, brave us here the best champagne from that stock. Son, the old man was shining like a shiny coin. Son, you don't know how pleased I am. To tell you the truth, I doubted that you would be able to accomplish my little errand so quickly. But I was wrong, and for the first time in my life, I'm glad I was wrong. Ask all you want for such great news. That collector's Mustang, remember? Liam squinted. No problem. James threw up his hands. Not a question at all. The seductive Adriana, smiling and shooting her eyes at Liam, brought a fogged bucket with a green gold bottle. Here you go. Did you have a good deal? She asked, seeing that the chief was in a good mood. Oh yes, James said. A very, very good one. Well, son, he raised his glass as soon as the door closed behind the secretary. To our family. Liam joined in the toast with gusto. The champagne was indeed excellent. The next day we had a family get-together with our relatives. The mother was delighted, as was the father, and she took Kathy to her room, and they clucked like two hens. Liam was generally very surprised to see his mother. Surely she had no country roots? The two of them had gotten together very quickly. Grandchildren. The father rumbled all over the hill. Two grandchildren at once. Wow, respect for the old man. Kathy's pregnancy went well. Village women with strong immune systems rarely had trouble bearing children. Liam expected her to become cranky and irritable like everyone in her position, but she hadn't changed a bit. She was still up early and eager to be active. She planted in the yard of the mansion a whole vegetable garden, digging in neat beds, treating her husband with ripe strawberries and young potatoes. But her husband was less and less at home, absorbed in the delights of his former free life. Kathy with her housekeeping and simple family pleasures, he was already madly bored. He became more and more annoyed to see her neatly coiffed and dressed in a homemade dress and impeccably ironed apron, fiddling in the kitchen, preparing dinners, baking pancakes. Lion was sick of seeing her contented face, of hearing her humming silly songs. Even the smell of her country food became disgusting to him at times, and he left home for a familiar old-time restaurant. Ordered sushi and a warm arugula salad. Another cocktail, met with old acquaintances, sat lazily sprawled out, and listened to the usual coddling of street girls. He was well in his native familiar element, and did not want to return to this cozy house, cleaned by the efforts of a young, diligent wife. Damn, what a mess he'd gotten himself into. But no, he was not going to lead the bland life of a married man. He, Liam, will be and will remain free. He would, as before, do what he wanted, take what was rightfully his, the rich women, the booze, the cars, and this village fool, nothing more than a domestic servant. But what annoyed him most of all was that Kathy never complained about anything. He wasn't at home all day long. Only occasionally he came in the morning, as they called it, on the horns and fell like a log into bed. Closer to dinner, with a woozy head, he would crawl to the first floor, where warm food, delicious tea, and his wife's smile were always waiting for him. Sometimes she worked in the vegetable garden, despite her big belly. Sometimes she cooked. Sometimes she knitted or sewed. Sometimes she read on the terrace or in the garden. But never once did he find her idly lying on the sofa or watching television. The latest model of iPhone, which he had given her on their honeymoon, was always in the same place, carefully packed in a case so that it wouldn't spill out. For some reason, that fact annoyed Liam the most. "Why aren't you on the phone?" He reprimanded her during his rare moments at home. "I'm just doing some chores." Kathy justified herself shyly. "What if I need something urgently and I can't reach you?" "I'll probably hear you." "That's right, you probably would." "And I still haven't installed any messenger." "Do I have to text you like an idiot?" "Why?" Sincerely surprised Kathy. "If you need something, you can call and tell me. You're the one who can." Liam got upset. "But I'm a businessman, busy. You understand? It is often inconvenient for me to talk. I have business meetings and negotiations. Then can you please make me this messenger?" She asked him belittlingly. "Well, you give." Liam grinned. "Like a 100-year-old grandmother, let's do it yourself with your hands. At the same time, you will learn how to do it like all normal people." "But like me?" "Look on the internet." He cut her off and left. There was nothing to do, so she had to learn the internet and all sorts of messengers. The whole day, poor Kathy tortured herself trying to install on her phone different wise programs and applications, tired beyond belief. It all took away from her as much energy as she had never spent on any, even the most difficult housework. "Oh my gosh," she thought, "if their lives are so complicated, if everything Liam does takes so much energy, no wonder he's so tired and irritable. There must be some way to help him." But what can she do? Here in the house, it's just her and one other female au pair. True, Kathy, accustomed to handling her own household, almost never asked her for anything herself. Only lately, when her stomach had gotten too much in the way, had the woman helped her in the garden. Maybe she knows something about these mobile wisdoms? "Wendy?" Kathy turned uncertainly to the housekeeper, who was sitting in a wicker chair on the terrace, sipping coffee and leafing through a magazine. "What?" Kathy turned around. "Can I help you?" "Wendy, you wouldn't happen to know how to handle this, would you?" "I know a little bit, like everyone else." She shrugged her shoulders. "Come on, what do you need?" Wendy was an ace compared to Kathy. She felt like a fish in water in the virtual world. She quickly taught the hostess all the subtleties of handling the iPhone. But she was not familiar with the laptop. "And you go to a special course." She advised Kathy. "They will teach you everything." Kathy thought about it. She had thought of self-education more than once. If now she lives in a big city, so it is necessary to try to somehow adapt here to get accustomed to these new conditions. Otherwise, she'll be a village idiot. When the children grow up, they'll be ashamed to have such a stupid mother. True, earlier she did not know how to approach it, but now she was going to do everything in her power. So when her father-in-law arrived once again and brought the doctor with him, he was very concerned about the medical part of Kathy's pregnancy. She shyly asked him, "James, I would like to enroll in a computer course. Why would you want to do that?" The man wondered. "To keep up with everyone else." Kathy explained, "Liam says I don't know how to do anything." "Ah, Liam?" The father-in-law stretched out. "I'll talk to him." "And you, my dear, remember that now your main task is your children, my grandchildren. You should not overwork and sit near the monitor pregnant, harmful. Understand, when you give birth, when the kids grow up, then you're welcome. You can learn computer literacy and whatever else you want. Right, doctor? He turned to the doctor. Their family doctor nodded, confirming James' words, and added, "With your permission, I would recommend Kathy's hospitalization in the clinic altogether." Why? James was concerned. Is something threatening to the babies? Not threatening, no. The doctor hastened to assure him. But at this stage of the pregnancy, all sorts of unexpected things can happen at any time. And although Kathy is perfectly healthy and feeling well, both she and the babies should be under round-the-clock medical supervision. That's something we can't provide at home. Of course not. My father-in-law agreed. Come on, Kathy. Let's go to the clinic. For how long? Kathy was confused. Now until the birth. The doctor said firmly. He didn't want to have to answer to James if anything happened, and the clinic was more reliable. And although the girl was healthy and strong, it would never hurt to be reassured. When they were already in the car, Kathy quietly turned to her father-in-law. "James?" "Yes," he mumbled, not looking away from the screen of his smartphone. "Don't be too hard on Liam. He's not angry. He's worried about me, that he won't be able to contact me if he needs to." The man looked at her carefully and nodded, smiling slightly. What astonishing naivete and gullibility, he thought, and in his callous soul, first of all, her strict upbringing was having an effect. Secondly, in front of her eyes stood, as an example of her parents' life together, in which there was no place for tenderness and unnecessary sentiment. But still Kathy hoped and believed that Liam gave all of his strength to work, caring for their well-being. Ah, if she had seen those very conditions and especially the implements of labor. But fortunately for her, for the time being, this dark side of their lives was safely hidden. And behind the high fence of the perinatal clinic, nothing threatened her and her children. She continued to feel fine. All her tests were normal and nothing particularly bothered her, but she had a lot of free time on her hands, too much. For this reason she had, quite unnoticed by herself, gotten quite good at the internet and social networks. She could already communicate. She laughed for a long time at the emoticons when she discovered them. She had a lively correspondence with Wendy about the household she had left behind, and even set up Instagram on her own. But her whole, pure nature didn't give her a chance to get bogged down in sticky and utterly pointless videos. Therefore, her best entertainment was reading, listening to audiobooks, radio shows, and watching movies. But even these activities didn't take her entirely away. She walked a lot, remembering that children need fresh air, and in bad weather she sat wrapped in a warm blanket on the wide open balcony and drank hot tea. A little later, Kathy discovered that it was possible to learn computer literacy remotely. She gingerly asked her mother-in-law to bring her a laptop, promising that she would not spend too much time at the monitor, and the mother-in-law honored her request. Liam's mother, in general, in her own way attached to this kind and naive girl. After all, she gave her warmth and joy of communication, which she was completely deprived of in her family. At one time, Vanessa regretted that she had not given birth to another child besides her son, and it would have been possible to have several. The material conditions allowed already then, in the distant years of their youth with James. She really wanted a girl, a daughter, but her husband was not particularly in favor, and somehow it didn't work out. So now, having found in her daughter-in-law Kathy a loving and trusting soul, she was only glad. She has no daughter-in-law, but she has an affectionate and honest daughter-in-law, and soon she will have 2 grandchildren. Thinking of this, Vanessa, more than once, cried joyfully. 2 beautiful little lumps, her blood, the continuation of the family. The sex of the future twins, doctors, strangely enough, have not yet been able to find out. At each ultrasound, the babies turned to face each other, and all the most necessary places were inaccessible to the scanner. They don't want us to know in advance who will be born. Kathy said with a laugh, "I don't care, as long as they're both healthy." And Vanessa shared her opinion, hoping, however, that at least one of the babies would be a girl. She had already had the experience of raising a boy, a sad experience. What had she and James done wrong? Why had Liam grown up like that? Though deep down, of course, she knew why. The permissiveness that her husband practiced had had such an effect on the child's fragile soul, and she was very much afraid that the same thing might happen to her grandchildren. James was afraid of something else, that he wouldn't live to see his grandchildren born. Every day he was giving up more and more, and his wife began to notice it. He held on only on the medications he was given every day at the day hospital and on his iron will. Lung cancer in the last stage, no longer operable, and although the doctors from the very beginning, as the terrible diagnosis, gave him no more than 6 months, he has already held out more. And there were only 2 months left before his grandchildren were born, only 2 months. He wanted to see them so badly. This desire had become his obsession, to see their continuation, to see if they were like him, like his kind, to know that his blood was in them. Then he could die in peace, and he had no intention of giving up. Yes, the birth of these babies was eagerly awaited by most of the family, but not by their birth father. After a conversation with their father, when he'd said to him, "Why are you making your wife nervous? What she needs right now is some peace and quiet," he got even angrier. So his father didn't need him, Liam, not only the Kathy incubator, but he himself was nothing more than a tool for his father to ensure the continuation of the species, damn him, and Liam is off to the races. His hard work, which Kathy so often thought of with gratitude, consisted of uncontrollable drinking and daily social gatherings, where he often dabbled in drugs. Collector's Mustang, a gift from his father, he had already slightly broken, and so drove with a crumpled fender. There was no time to bring it to the service. The tools of his labor were slutty girls. While Kathy was at home, he didn't bring anyone there for fear of his father's anger. Now that she was hospitalized and the rookery, in the lingo of his circles, was free, he did not hesitate one day to bring his catch directly into the marital bedroom. At noon, Wendy nearly broke the dishes when she saw a half-naked girl in a Kathy robe open to the floor coming down the stairs. "What's for breakfast?" she asked, lighting a long, thin cigarette. That same evening, Wendy packed up her things and left. She wrote to Kathy that she was quitting for family reasons. Kathy was upset. Who would keep the house in order while she was away? Told her mother-in-law the next time she saw her. Vanessa, suspecting something wrong, went to the mansion to see what was wrong. The morning her son was supposed to have his 10th dream in his bed. He was indeed there, but in the same bed was also lying another girl. And there were empty bottles on the carpet. "Get up," Vanessa commanded, pouring the rest of the contents of one of the bottles on the head of the uninvited guest. "Ouch!" she shrieked and jumped up, batting her eyes. "Who are you?" "Mom." My son's eyes widened. "What are you doing here?" "I came to visit," kindly explained the woman, sitting down on the chair. "To see how you're doing with the household. The housekeeper left you." "What is she?" Lion was surprised. "I'll tell you what." Finally, the mother boiled up. "And then I'll tell your father, too." "Let's see how you'll sing then." "Do you have any idea how you're insulting your wife with your behavior?" "The mother of your future children." And what will happen if she finds out about your outrageous behavior? That's it. Liam fought back against his mother. Stop yelling, she was just leaving. If only this could solve all your problems. Vanessa sighed. I don't have any problems except for you. Liam shouted in anger. I'm sick of your moralizing. I'm a grown man and I can live my life the way I want to. Of course you can, nodded his mother, but only at your own expense. Don't forget, Lion shrank back a little. Let's make a deal like this. Vanessa said to her son that there will be no more outrage in the house. I can't control your whole life. I don't need to. But Kathy and your children deserve much better treatment, so you will no longer throw out the servants and bring your girls here. Look, if I ever hear about this again, I'll tell my father and he'll take away your allowance. I hope you understand me well? Yes, Liam mumbled. I do. I couldn't be better. Good. Vanessa got up from her chair. Oh, and don't forget to call Wendy and bring her back. When Kathy comes in with the babies, the place should be in perfect order. James was lying in a hospital bed at the daycare center, covered in tubes. It was a good thing all his hair had come out a long time ago, and now he didn't have to explain the sudden baldness to anyone, whenever it happened. Oh, this is so lousy. The pounding in his temples, the ringing in his ears, the darkness in his eyes, but he seemed to be holding on for now. How much longer? How long does he have? Who can say? As if hearing his thoughts, the doctor entered the room. How are we doing, James? Not so good. I have to say that with your diagnosis and the length of treatment, you're still hanging in there. Good for you. The doctor smiled encouragingly. But unfortunately, the latest tests. What? I'm finished? James grinned sadly. You need to go to a hospital. The doctor said trustingly, so that we can give you round-the-clock care. In other words, lay down to die, sighed James. No, you won't. He got out of bed, but not as quickly as he would have liked. He felt dizzy and had to grab the headboard to catch his breath. James, where are you going? You can't. The doctor started, but the stubborn patient did not listen to him and dialed the chauffeur's number. 5 minutes later, he was escorted to the car, and in another 20 minutes, he was already in the perinatal clinic. Hello, daughter-in-law. Roughly and cheerfully, he said, Kathy, opening the door. Good afternoon. Kathy smiled. How good of them to warn me of a visitor. She rejoiced a moment ago, barely having time to hide her laptop. How are you doing in here? Her father-in-law stepped closer to her to kiss her cheek, and she involuntarily felt the pungent hospital spirit emanating from him. Are you not feeling well? She asked, looking into his gaunt face, into the dark circles under his eyes. I can't hide anything from you. James laughed and immediately coughed, shaking from the painful spasms. After a little while, he got his breath back and began to speak. I did not want to tell any of you, so as not to upset or frighten you. But my days are numbered, Kathy. The doctors have only given me 6 months to live, and I'm already 2 years too long. My last wish is to see my grandchildren while I'm still alive. Don't interrupt me, please. He made a hand sign, seeing that she was about to say something to him. Let me finish. So, Kathy, since I can hardly hold them in my arms anymore, I must at least do what I can for them and for you too. So I've decided to make a will. It'll be done in the most honorable way possible. Most of my fortune will go to my grandchildren, and you will manage their estate until they are 18 years old. But why me and not Liam? Kathy couldn't help but interject. She had always been taught not to interrupt her elders, but this speech had struck her, stirred her. Liam? My father-in-law smirked sadly and wickedly. I will not forget him either. He is my son, after all. But I'll tell you frankly, Kathy, I'm not sure he can handle my financial empire. You don't realize the size of it, and relax, you'll have help managing your children's fortunes. I have a trusted staff and lawyers who will draw up the paperwork in a way that won't hurt a mosquito. So, I ask you one thing. Promise me, girl, that you will do everything in your power, and even beyond that, to bring up my grandchildren worthy people. Of course I will, Kathy said hotly. Of course, Daddy, don't worry about that. James and Vanessa will be brought up in love and strictness. What? My father-in-law couldn't believe his ears. What did you say? Or did I mishear? No. His daughter-in-law smiled at him. You heard right, Daddy. We're naming them James and Vanessa. I'm not as stupid as everyone thinks I am, and I'm well aware that this is all. She waved her hand around. All these opportunities, it's all you're doing. And your wife, she is also a very good person. I love her like my own mother. Daughter, wept father-in-law, embracing her and pressing his wrinkled wet cheek. Daughter, but where are you from? I know, Kathy assured him. I know it's a boy and a girl. Mommy always knows these things. That's how Vanessa caught them when she entered the room. They were crying and hugging each other. Of course, they told her about her husband's illness because there was nothing to hide. In general, she was going to tell James about her son's outrageous behavior and looked for him in the office, where she was told that he had gone to the clinic to Kathy. But now, of course, that conversation never happened. Together with Kathy, they did persuade This is William, said the father-in-law to his daughter-in-law. He'll be helping you with all your business. You have some papers to sign now. Can I read them? Kathy asked. Of course, Kathy, nodded William. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them all. And please, just call me William. Kathy carefully read everything that needed to be signed. Do I understand correctly that you, Dad, are appointing me CEO of your company? She wondered. After all, I am only a woman, and I have no education, and then, what about Liam? It is my right to appoint as the head of my own company whoever I see fit. Her father-in-law interrupted her with the same unappealing tone. Liam is not up to the task, to my great regret, but you, with the help of William and other loyal employees, can. You, as the representative of my grandchildren, will have a controlling interest. And please don't tell my husband yet. I'll tell him myself. Kathy left her father-in-law almost in shock. No, of course she had already begun to suspect that Liam was not as fond of her as she had thought at first. He never showed up at the clinic again. He didn't answer her calls and messages, and Wendy told her some things. Kathy cried all night, but by nature, strong in body and spirit, she calmed down and accepted it in the morning. After all, she had never once seen in the village with her own eyes the same unearthly love that is written about in books and dreamed of by every girl. But Kathy? When he woke up, he didn't immediately remember what had happened in the morning. How long have you been here? I dozed off. Did you sleep well, Daddy? His daughter-in-law asked him. I'm glad. Now let's drink this. Who was here with you just now? James finally remembered. Some old woman, a little woman? That's my grandmother. She came at my request. I hope you don't mind. She still called her father-in-law by her first or second name, depending on the situation. Baba Kathy can heal with herbs and hands, remove spoil, help with the evil eye. She cured my younger brother of a stupor. People come from all over the neighborhood to see her, and she never refuses anyone. You know, I feel better today. James replied. It was as if he had forgotten his original question. I feel invigorated. What did you give me to drink? Herbal tincture. Kathy smiled. Thyme, chamomile, St. John's wort, soothing. It really soothes. My father-in-law perked up. And even, kind of invigorating. Well, how are you? What do the doctors say? How long do we have to wait? Not much longer. Another week, maybe a week and a half. Oh, I wish we could wait, sighed my father-in-law. I wish we could wait. But that evening, Kathy felt a pain in her lower abdomen. At first a tugging, exhausting pain, then sharp, like a knife stabbing. Startled out of her wits, she pressed the staff call button. What? A nurse came in and saw Kathy and splashed her hands. Looks like it started. It's too early, too early. Kathy moaned, lifting herself up on the bed. Ouch! What's that? Her water broke. The nurse said, pulling back the sheet. Call the midwives. Oh my goodness, get up, get up. That's it, and let's walk around the room. It will be easier and faster. If the pain is sharp, lean on the bed, but do not lie down, do not lie down. Okay? Yeah. Kathy nodded. It feels better. It's supposed to. It's all right, but it's going to hurt. It's normal, just bear with it. By 1 o'clock in the morning, Kathy refused the anesthesia, thinking it would hurt the babies. No, it won't. The impact is minimal. The doctors persuaded her, but she wouldn't give up. By 3, they arranged a consilium, and after examining her again, took her to a separate unit. Lying on a special table, Kathy did, as she had been taught in the training group, endured and breathed. Patience and breathing again. Colleagues, I believe we should do a cesarean. The older of the doctors with the beard listened worriedly to Kathy's pulse. Risk factor, twins. No C-section. Barely able to cope with the pain, Kathy wheezed. Soon enough. Half an hour later, the first baby was born, healthy and screaming. The second one followed, 6 minutes apart. The babies were remarkably healthy. You, Mommy, well done. Approvingly said to her nurse of the maternity ward. All such moms would be patient. Kathy, and would like to answer her something, but could not. Her eyes were literally closing from fatigue. After both babies had been laid on her for a couple of minutes, and she had hugged them and whispered something affectionate in their ears, her strength had completely left her. Kathy awoke, unaccustomedly late. The sun was already high above the horizon. Recovering, she turned her head. Next to her bed were 2 glass cradles, and in each tightly sung and quietly sniffing a small living lump. Kathy got up cautiously, walked over to them, and watched them sleep for a long time, smiling. There was a quiet knock on the door, and the nurse slipped in. You awake, Mommy? You have visitors. Vanessa came into the room, radiant and joyful, followed by the unusually quiet and cautious Liam, carrying a huge bouquet of roses. And behind him, Kathy couldn't believe her eyes. Her father-in-law was in a wheelchair, already shining like a shiny light bulb. Didn't expect to see me? James laughed, and then he coughed, but not hard. Where are my little darlings? Who's Kathy? Who's who? She smiled. No change, just like we agreed. And with a wave of her hand, she named them one by one. James and Vanessa Brown, please meet them. Congratulations. Liam came up to her and kissed her awkwardly on the cheek. Here, this is for you. He held out the bouquet. Lisa, put it in the vase, please. Indifferently, looking at the pink armful, asked Kathy Nurse. And congratulations to you, she said to her husband. How cute they are. The mother-in-law smiled, leaning over the cradles, and soon they will be able to see them closer. Cautiously asked father-in-law, who also moved closer to the grandchildren. We'll see them now. Kathy laughed, but they're asleep. Protesting, Vanessa said, That's okay, smiled Kathy. Healthy babies sleep soundly, and besides, it's time for me to feed them. She deftly took one by one the babies, and putting them on the changing table, unwrapped them from their diapers. Here, look at us. Little Brown yawned and pulled up like kittens and squeaked just as pitifully and thinly. My breed, said the satisfied father-in-law when the boy squeezed the finger offered him by his grandfather with his clinging hand. Well, hello, namesake, and who is this princess? He would have traded on his grandchildren for a long time, but Vanessa tugged him by the sleeve. Let's go already. The babies need to be fed, Kathy. Oh, yes, of course. The father-in-law hustled to turn around, the nurse helped him quickly, and all the visitors disappeared behind the ward door. And Liam never said anything else. After a week, Kathy and the babies were discharged home, where they were cared for by 2 helpers and her mother-in-law. She practically moved in with them to help Kathy. In fact, the young mother needed minimal help. The children were so calm, and she herself was such a grip that she could probably have done without help at all. Liam arrived home neatly by 8 o'clock in the evening and almost always sober. He politely inquired about their day, and after looking at the children, retired to his room. Kathy moved with the twins into a larger room overlooking the sunny side of the garden. The father-in-law, who was stable, calm, and in no great pain, was often brought in. He showered them with gifts, and one day told Kathy this. Kathy, while I was in the clinic, I once had a strange dream, as if a strange old woman came to my room at dawn and laid her hands on my head. And immediately I felt so calm, so warm. From that day I recovered and went on the mend, and your herb helps well. Kathy didn't tell her father-in-law how it was, and her grandmother didn't tell her to spread the word. And Wendy, who had come into the house again, marveled at her mistress. You could see our country folk, whatever she undertakes, everything is done. She was praising Kathy on the phone, and Kathy overheard her. Where are you Wendy from? She asked her assistant. Woodbury Heights. There's a village. Maybe you've heard of it. I don't think so. Kathy wondered, and I don't think you've heard of ours. Addicts. It's been 3 months since the babies were born when James got worse again. The prognosis was unfavorable. The doctors frowned. Probably a few more days, maybe 2 weeks. Kathy and Vanessa cried. Drove to the clinic where they had put him again, sat beside each day grieving. Kathy called the village and asked her grandmother. Maybe she would treat her father-in-law one more time. But the grandmother, who spoke on the phone, very reluctantly, conveyed to her mother that she had taken sin on her soul last time, and now there was nothing to be done. On the day of his death, James felt better, even ate a little. He talked to his relatives, apologized to them if he had offended them. Liam's lips curved, but he didn't say anything to his father. At 21 o'clock, James Brown, the founder and permanent head of his financial empire, died peacefully, surrounded by family and friends. That's what the newspapers said in the obituaries. A huge crowd gathered for the funeral. All employees, business partners, various necessary people, representatives of the authorities, and a bunch of relatives and friends. The son showed up drunk and even managed to miss, throwing a clod of earth on his father's coffin. Bastard, Vanessa said to him and cried. He tried to say something in a stammering voice, but Kathy came up and said quietly, Please don't go away. Mother's having a hard enough time as it is. You'll come back later and apologize. You bastard. The drunken husband was indignant. I'll get you. And he tried to hit Kathy, but slipped on the slippery clay soil and fell into the cemetery mud. He cursed, looked at his greasy clay-stained black gufsy suit, got up and walked away. A couple of days later, he showed up at night with a young girl and, grinning drunkenly, told Kathy that she was going to live here. "This is my house. It's all mine, you understand?" He yelled, "And your place is in the pigsty. Go back to your stinking village. I've had enough of you. Speak quietly, please. The children are asleep." "Calm down," Kathy told him, and then handed the keys to the mansion to the maiden, who looked at the scene with insolent, drunken eyes. "Take them. I take it you'll be running the place from now on. Good night." She turned and went to her room, locking the door. "Hey, you!" her husband yelled after her. "Come back immediately, we'll talk. What are you doing with the keys to my house, huh?" He tried to follow her up the stairs, but could not do it. His legs did not obey him. To hell with her. He waved his hand and staggered to the refrigerator. "Do you want a beer?" The girl didn't refuse to keep him company. Early in the morning, Kathy, with the twins in her arms, squeamishly turned away and walked past the huge leather sofa in the hall where the couple had settled, unable to find the strength to climb the stairs to the bedroom. The cab took them to her mother-in-law's mansion, and Kathy never returned to her first family nest again. By late afternoon, a waking Liam was pelting her with calls and texts, demanding she return and bring his children, threatening her with swift reprisal in every possible way. Kathy texted him that she was ready to meet at the company office to discuss the terms of the divorce. Who did she think she was? He was furious, methodically throwing dishes from the cupboard onto the floor. "What divorce? I'll leave her without everything." No, what an idiot full of idiots. She doesn't even remember that she signed a prenup. Elsa, his young mistress, looked indifferently at his rage. She didn't care about anything at all. And soon Liam received an official notice from the lawyer about the beginning of divorce proceedings. "Dan, it's Michael, our office lawyer." Liam stared at the text in bewilderment. Is he out of his mind? And rushed to call the lawyer, but he only correctly repeated the dry wording. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" Liam yelled into the phone. "Do you know that now I am in charge of the office and everywhere else?" The lawyer assured him that he was fully aware of all the facts, and advised Liam to take a closer look at his email. "You must have missed another email in the same folder, Liam," the lawyer said. "There's also a notice about the announcement of your father's will." "What?" Liam marveled. "What the hell will?" Yelping and grunting, he went through the mail again and indeed found the document he was looking for, but the information in it was only the same, only with the specification of the place and time of the appointed procedure. Kathy and Vanessa, meanwhile, were fully immersed in the simple pleasures of home. Under reliable protection in the family mansion, they spent the whole day with the children, took walks, baked cakes, and generally enjoyed the peace and company of each other. They invited Wendy, who had no intention of staying at Liam's house. It's a terrible thing to do. She complained to Kathy, not realizing she was hurting her. Every day there's debauchery, drinking, and naked girls. Ah, mark my words, Kathy, he won't end well. Often in the 2 weeks that remained before the elder Brown's will was read, William came to the mansion, and he and Kathy discussed things at length, poring over papers. The lawyer was also in attendance, and even the notary was brought in. Vanessa, preoccupied with her grandchildren, didn't even wonder what was going on. Mostly she already knew everything. Her husband had told her before his death exactly how he had disposed of his fortune, and she wasn't that interested in the details. On the appointed day and hour, all interested parties arrived at Brown's office. In the parking lot in front of the building, there was no place to fall, and the guards were exhausted, checking according to the established protocol every car coming in. "All right, ladies and gentlemen," the presiding member of the board of directors began. "Let me welcome you all today on this solemn and mournful day when we must first of all express once again our sincere sadness at the passing of our deeply respected founding father, Brown James. I ask those present to stand and honor his memory with a moment of silence." Everyone rose, lowered their heads, and stood in silence until the chairman rang the bell. "Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Now let me begin the extraordinary meeting of the Board of Directors of the Joint Stock Company Stavka. The agenda. While the agenda was read out, which took quite a long time, Kathy sat immersed in her thoughts and almost did not hear anything. For the umpteenth time she asked herself the same question, whether she was doing the right thing, whether she had not abused too much the trust of an old, sick, dying man who had given her and her children so many opportunities and at the same time imposed such enormous responsibilities. Will she be able to cope with this heavy burden? And let me now introduce you to our new chairman of the board of directors. Kathy heard the words of the speaker. Liam, who was sitting almost opposite her at the huge, polished mahogany oval table, grinned contentedly and wickedly, preparing to stand up to general applause. Today he was surprisingly sober and in normal shape, shaved, combed, in an impeccably ironed navy blue suit, probably from some brand. Safa didn't know much about them. He wore a snow-white shirt and a beautiful tie with a fashionable paisley pattern. Now please, Brown Kathy, a round of applause, gentlemen. The gentlemen clapped, amazed as much as Liam, whose eyes were almost popping out of their orbits and his hands were treacherously trembling. Kathy stood up proudly, straightened to her short height, and raised her chin. Please take note. The speaker spoke. Kathy has been appointed CEO of the company by an order dated, and he gave the date. Signed by the former CEO, James Brown. Those who wish to read it may do so. A copy of the order was passed around. People read it, quietly expressing their bewilderment, and passed it on. We will now turn the floor over to our esteemed notary, who will read the deceased's will to us. Kathy sat back in her seat, and her mother-in-law, sitting next to her, squeezed her hand encouragingly under the table. The notary, too, started from afar and spent a long time reading out the tediously long wording. Finally, he got to the point. To my son, Brown Liam, I bequeath 10% of the authorized capital of a limited liability company and a block of shares in a joint stock company in the amount of 5% of the total number of ordinary and 2% of preferred shares. Liam, in a silent frenzy, broke the Parker pen lying on the table in front of him, and the ink spilled out onto the tabletop and onto the sleeve of his snow-white shirt, spreading out in an ugly blot. To my wife, Brown Vanessa, I bequeath. Then came the enumeration of shares, amounts, and various types of movable and immovable property. The deceased did not forget about his leading employees, describing to them a bit of shares so that they would not be remembered. And finally, the notary got to the main part of the will. I bequeath the rest of my estate, whatever it may consist of, and wherever located, to my grandchildren, Brown James and Brown Vanessa, in equal shares each. And to this wording the notary deemed it necessary to clarify. Including the controlling interest in the joint stock company Stavka, until the majority of the main heirs and their executor and manager of all property is appointed their mother, Brown Kathy. That's a hell of a thing. Suddenly, Liam shouted out and abruptly stood up, throwing his chair away. The people sitting next to him recoiled in fright. I will appeal against this farce. Father would never do such a thing. I assure you that the will has been drawn up in full form on the appropriate form, has been recorded in the electronic registry of the Unified Notary System, and has been properly authenticated. Important, said the notary. I don't give a damn about your registers. Liam shouted in his voice. You've got a snake on your chest. He suddenly pulled out a small revolver and pointed it at Kathy. Stop, you bastard, he said quietly and violently. The people scattered out of the office in panic. Only the notary alone sat unperturbed and glued to his seat. Papers were in disarray, lying on the desk and on the floor, and the panic was terrible. Kathy sat staring at the muzzle of the gun pointed at her, growing monstrously larger, coming closer and closer to her, and becoming horribly, horribly like a black hole. What about the children? A thought flashed through her mind, and it gave her strength. With an abrupt movement, she wriggled like a snake and slid onto the chair under the table, dragging her mother-in-law behind her with a jerk. The chair on which Vanessa was sitting fell, and she fell with it. Almost simultaneously, a gunshot sounded. Again there was running, the noise of fighting, the clinking of breaking dishes. When the police and security guards, who arrived on a call, rushed into the office, Liam was already lying face down on the floor, with his hands tied with office twine, pressing the torso of the defeated criminal, with his foot to the floor, financial consultant William towering over him. And two frightened women sat under the desk, hugging each other. And the notary sat like Buddha at a small table opposite the window, guarding the will entrusted to him. Liam was in prison for 7 years for attempted murder and drug possession. Kathy took the late Brown Sr.'s place and soon learned to steer her financial ship with confidence. Partners and colleagues changed their minds 3 months after her appointment when, sensing a volatile situation on the stock market, she made a very controversial decision to sell some of the shares, and as a result their quotations rose significantly. William, her first assistant and loyal beau, is courting her, and Kathy likes it, but she is in no hurry to say yes to a man in love. The twins are growing up, and Vanessa, looking at her grandson, often cries, seeing in him a copy of her promiscuous son. But Kathy, with an iron hand, manages her wayward son, not letting him get away with it. Perhaps she will be able to do what the older Browns failed to do, to grow from a small child, a big and real man.